I knew something was wrong with Sunday dinner when my dead wife's gravy boat reached the table before my daughter-in-law did. It was a small thing, a silver thing, a thing that fit in my hands as naturally as prayer once had. I stood at the kitchen counter with a dish towel over my shoulder, looking at that dented old boat in Daniel's hand, and felt the room tip half a degree in a direction I could not yet name. Lorraine never let the gravy leave the kitchen before the cook sat down. I wish I could tell you I understood the danger then. I did not. What I understood was only that a house I had loved for 41 years had just answered me in the wrong voice. Sunday dinner at my house had always begun before the food. It began in the front hallway with coats on the peg rail Lorraine had insisted we keep even after the children were grown. It began in the pantry alcove with the recipe cards she wrote in a slanted compact hand that wasted no space and forgave no vagueness. It began in the sound the old radiators made when the weather was changing, a sort of soft iron knocking that ran through the walls like the house clearing its throat. It began with the smell of onions, sweetening and butter and celery, giving off that clean green smell that somehow carried both Thanksgiving and ordinary February. It began with plates warming low in the oven and the dining room curtains pulled back before 3 o'clock so the west light could find the walnut table before the family did. After Lorraine died, I kept all of it, or I told myself I did. On the Sunday, I am talking about the first Sunday in March, the house had the washed-out look old Ohio houses get at the end of winter. The front yard was all thawed mud at the edges. The boxwoods out by the porch steps were still dull with cold, and the stained glass panel beside the front door threw a thin amber patch over the hall runner that had gone pale in the middle from too many years of children and groceries and dog nails, before the dog died and the children grew up, and even the grandchildren learned to wipe their shoes without being told. I had been up since a little after 6 because old men and grief both keep country hours. The coffee had gone dark on me while I was trimming the carrots. By 9, I had the chicken roasting over onions and stock the potatoes peeled and standing in cold water in Lorraine's big enamel pot and the green beans snapped into a bowl under a damp towel. I had set out the good plates, even though Mike always told me paper ones would do just as well and save my back. And I had laid the serving spoon beside the gravy boat with the handle turned outward because Lorraine hated people reaching across each other when something hot was involved. These were the kinds of things that had become my religion after she was gone. Not God, not church. Sequence. I know how that sounds. There are men who survive widowhood by getting rid of everything, and men who survive by remarrying too soon, and men who survive by pretending not to feel the difference at all. I survived, if that is the word for it, by keeping the house in motion along its old grooves. I vacuumed on Saturdays. I folded the good napkins on Sundays. I cut the bread only after the second doorbell. I filled Lorraine's gravy boat last after the vegetables were in their dishes, and the children were in their seats, and the room had gone from clatter to appetite. It is possible to make an altar out of habit without admitting that is what you have done. I was standing at the sink drying my hands when I picked up the gravy boat. It was heavy for its size, old silver, a wedding present from Lorraine's aunt in Dayton, who had once told me in a voice full of warning that silver was not for display, it was for use, because the point of fine things was not to admire them but to let them gather a family's fingerprints. The boat had a shallow dent at the base where Daniel dropped it at 16, helping clear after Easter. Lorraine laughed and told him now it finally looked like it belonged to us and used it every holiday and almost every Sunday after that. I rubbed my thumb over the dent, now the same way I always did. That motion carried memory in it. I could see Lorraine at the stove, not in some washed-out sentimental way, but exactly as she used to be reading the room through the pass-through. She had a way of tilting the spoon once to check the thickness, never twice. She would glance at the table and know in a second whether a child needed cutting up, whether one of the boys was sulking, whether her own mother was getting tired, whether somebody had arrived carrying more than a casserole. She knew somehow that the order of a meal mattered because the order told people what they were worth. I did not know I was thinking that until much later. At the time, I only missed her. I poured the gravy into the boat, wiped the lip with the edge of a towel, and set it near the pass-through. The smell came up warm in rich chicken drippings, black pepper thyme, that deep flour and fat smell that belongs more to homes than restaurants. The kitchen windows had steamed in the corners. The clock over the mudroom door said 4:12. Daniel was due at 4:30 with Mara and the children. Mike would come later, as usual, muttering about traffic, even though he lived 19 minutes away and liked making an entrance as if the rest of us were all in suspense over whether he would show. Daniel had started arriving early after Lorraine died. He said it was to help me lift the heavier dishes, move chairs, carry things to the table. I had been grateful for it. At 72, a man becomes grateful for any help that does not make him feel helpless. There are forms of gratitude that blur the edges of things. The first one there that day was Daniel. I heard his car in the drive, the muted crunch through Thor's soft gravel by the side yard, then the shutting of a door harder than necessary. He came in through the front with his own key, as family did, and called Dad before he even had both feet inside. "In here," I said. He appeared in the kitchen in his navy quarter zip and pressed khakis, carrying a bakery box in one hand and his phone in the other. Daniel always looked assembled. That was the word for him. Even as a boy, he had come down to breakfast with his hair already disciplined and his homework already clipped together. At 44, he had the same clean lines, the same neat brown hair going silver at the temples, in a way people probably called distinguished. He kissed my cheek, set the bakery box down, and scanned the stove. The counters, the dishes. Not critically at first glance, just quickly. "Smells good," he said. "You didn't have to do all this." "That is a lie every person tells right before eating," I said. He smiled. "Need anything?" "Potatoes in about 10. Then you can carry the beans in when Mara gets here." At that, something in his expression tightened and smoothed again so quickly another man might not have noticed it. "I'll manage it," he said. "Manage the beans." The flow. He took off his watch and set it carefully on the counter beside the bakery box. "Kids are a little off today." Ben refused church shoes. Mara's running behind. He said it lightly, but not casually. Daniel never said anything casually. His voice was always pitched for usefulness. Running behind from what? Just from everything. He took a small black digital timer from the pocket of his quarter zip and set it beside his watch. "I told her not to fuss with the dessert, but you know how she gets." I did not know how she got. Not really. Mara was 39, soft-spoken, quick in the kitchen, pretty in a tired way these days, with dark blonde hair she usually caught at the nape and eyes that looked as if they wanted more sleep than her life allowed. There had been a time in the first years of their marriage when she laughed faster. Lately, she seemed always half a beat elsewhere, as though part of her attention was being held in reserve. "What did she make?" I asked. "Lemon bars." He opened the bakery box. "And I grabbed bread from Turner's in case yours isn't enough." I looked at the loaf I had already sliced on the board. "There's enough bread." "Well, good. Then we have extra." He said that in the tone he used when a decision had already been made and everyone else could enjoy agreeing with it. The back of my neck felt cool. Not alarmed, only aware. He began moving around the kitchen before I asked him to opening the warming drawer, checking the stack of plates, straightening a dish towel that did not need straightening. Daniel had always done that too. Lorraine used to say he was born prepared to supervise a world that had not asked for the help. It floated through me now with such clarity that I nearly turned to answer her. Instead, I mashed the potatoes. The sound of the hand mixer filled the kitchen in a blunt domestic roar. Butter and milk and steam rose in front of me. Daniel carried the bread to the dining room and came back. He touched the timer. He looked at the beans. He looked at the chicken. He looked toward the mudroom door as though expecting motion beyond it before there was any. When the front door opened again, it was with children attached. Ben came in first, all 7 years of him in a blue sweater and untied shoe, then Ellie, smaller and quieter. her brown cardigan buttoned wrong at the top and a purple-colored pencil tucked behind one ear like she had forgotten it there from church. Mara followed with a foil-covered pan in both hands and her purse slipping off one shoulder. The house changed temperature with them in it. Children do that even when they are subdued. Ben immediately smelled chicken and wanted to know if there was pie. Ellie came to me for her hug without speaking. Mara gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and apologized for being late before she was fully into the room. "We weren't late," Daniel said from behind me. Mara smiled too fast. "Not late, just, we're fine," he said. She stopped. That was all. A nothing, a husband shortening a sentence. It should not have meant much, but I had lived long enough with one woman to know the difference between a conversation joining and one being closed. Lorraine had a rule that no one entered her kitchen carrying apology unless they had broken glass or set fire to a towel. "People who bring food don't apologize," she used to say. "They get thanked." So I took the pan from Mara and said, "You're here. That's the whole job." Her shoulders loosened an inch. "It's just lemon bars," she said. "I know you did the real work. You brought children in one piece and sugar in a pan," I said. "That counts as civilization." Daniel gave a brief laugh that seemed meant to agree with me and end the exchange at the same time. He took Mara's purse from her shoulder and hung it on the mudroom hook rather than the hall peg, though she had come through the front door. Then he took the foil pan from where I had set it on the counter and put it in the mudroom instead of beside the dessert plates. "Mara, can you get the beans going?" he said. She blinked. I thought, "The beans, then maybe freshen up a little." He glanced at the children. "Ellie hands. Ben's shoes tied before you sit." I turned off the mixer and looked at Mara. She had gone, still in that peculiar way some people do when they are trying to move and not move at once. "The beans are right there," I said, nodding to the bowl on the counter. "I know," Daniel said. "She'll handle it." He said it smiling. Mara touched Ellie's shoulder as she passed and went toward the mudroom instead of the stove. I watched her go with the peculiar discomfort of a man who knows he has missed a beat in familiar music, but cannot yet tell whether the fault is in the players or his own hearing. The mudroom in my house sits between the kitchen and the garage with a long bench under the window hooks along one wall and the old-school cubbies I put in when the boys were little so they'd stop dropping boots in the middle of the kitchen floor. Lorraine painted it pale green one summer and lined the bench with washable cushions that she changed with the seasons. After she died, I left the room mostly alone because it seemed wrong to improve a space that still held the shape of her practical mind. The children used the cubbies now. Mara's purse hung beside Ben's puffer coat and Ellie's tiny scarf. The interior garage door stood closed. I heard it open once, then close. Then the kitchen was full of ordinary things again. Ben wanted milk. Ellie wanted the pink cup with the bendy straw she liked when she was younger, though she was old enough now to be half embarrassed by still asking for it. Daniel was opening drawers without asking where things were, which on paper sounds helpful and sometimes is. He laid out utensils, checked the water glasses, set out the butter. He moved the bread basket 2 inches to the left and then 2 inches back, as if his hands needed the work of control the way mine needed the work of memory. Mike came in at 4:45 with the smell of cold air and cigarette smoke clinging to his coat, though he had quit years ago and now only smelled that way when he stood outside the courthouse. He kissed my head, insulted my tie, told Ben he was wearing a criminally loose shoelace, and gave Ellie a little bow that made her smile despite herself. Mike had always known how to arrive in a room without trying to own it. He looked around once and said, "Where's Mara?" "Finishing up," Daniel said, with what Mike asked. Daniel was pouring water. "Dinner." Mike glanced at me. I shrugged. We sat the children down with crackers while I carved the chicken in the kitchen. The knife moved through skin and steam lifted from the breast meat in soft white ribbons. The smell of thyme and pepper and hot fat filled the room, and for a moment it was so exactly a Sunday from 20 years ago that my throat tightened on me. I saw Lorraine where Mara should have been reaching past me for the platter, bumping my hip with hers, because the kitchen was always built for one person, fewer than the family demanded, saying, "Tom, let the knife rest a minute or you'll lose the juices," as if she had not told me that every Sunday for 3 decades. There is a particular cruelty in memory when it arrives carrying instruction from someone who can no longer correct the present. I set the carved chicken on the platter. Daniel lifted the potatoes. Mike took the bread basket. I reached for the gravy boat. Daniel took it first. That was the moment. That was the small wrong detail, not the whisper, not yet. Not the garage. Only my son lifting Lorraine's gravy boat and turning toward the dining room while Mara was still nowhere in sight. I heard myself say, "Hold on." He looked back. "What, Mara's not seated? She'll be right there." His tone was easy. He was already moving. That is the trouble with certain kinds of wrongness. They arrive dressed in efficiency. They ask you by their very smoothness whether you intend to make a fuss over nothing. I could have insisted. I did not. That failure has lived with me. We carried the dishes in. The dining room looked as it always did on Sunday, in the last light walnut table polished to a soft, dull shine, good china with a thin blue rim, the brass chandelier Lorraine had hated in catalogues, and loved once it was ours because life often works that way. The west window was pale gold. The children's cups glowed like small lanterns. A basket of rolls sat between the potatoes and the chicken. Daniel set the gravy boat near my place and reached to straighten the serving spoon beside it. Ellie was watching the mudroom doorway. Not the food, not Ben stealing an extra roll. The doorway. "Grace," I said, because that was what came next in the order of things. We all bowed our heads. I had barely gotten to for this food and those who made it when I felt a warm little weight against my arm. Ellie had leaned into me, not hard, just enough to be felt. Her voice came into the sleeve of my jacket so soft I might have mistaken it for the rustle of fabric, if not for the words. "Grandpa." She whispered he locked her in the garage again. I do not think my face changed. Years as a principal and decades as a father had taught me how to receive a blow without displaying the bruise to the room. But inside me, something opened cold. I finished the prayer. I could hear my own voice and hated how normal it sounded. When I looked up, Daniel was unfolding his napkin. Mike had already noticed something in my face and was pretending not to. Ben was reaching for butter. Ellie had gone still as a held breath. The mudroom door opened. Mara came in carrying the green beans. There is a sound a serving spoon makes when it touches a ceramic dish. A soft, blunt tap. I heard that sound as she set the beans down on the trivet and smiled around the table as if she had only just stepped away to fetch salt. "Sorry," she said. "I lost track." Daniel did not look at her. He reached for the bowl as though this had always been the plan. At that same moment from the kitchen there came a small electronic beep. Daniel's timer. He half turned his head toward the kitchen, then back again. "No worries," he said. "You just needed a minute." Mara sat down at last, but only halfway, as if prepared to rise again if asked. I looked at the beans. They were not hot enough to have just come from the stove. "Everything all right?" I asked her. She looked at me quickly, then at Daniel, then back to her plate. "Of course." Ellie had not touched her roll. I do not remember the first few minutes of that meal in perfect order, only in pieces. Mike saying something about a judge with no patience for human frailty. Ben asking if gravy counted as a vegetable if it touched peas. Mara cutting Ben's chicken into small pieces without taking any for herself. Daniel passing the potatoes, the bread, the butter, in a smooth sequence that looked for all the world like competence. The smell of rosemary from the chicken skin. The radiator ticking behind the sideboard. The peculiar awareness I had of the mudroom door at the end of the buffet, as though it were a person in the room whose mood we all had to account for. I told myself children say strange things. I told myself again meant some prior childish understanding of a timeout or a fight or a parent closing a door too hard. I told myself Mara looked tired, not endangered. I told myself if there were real trouble here, it would not arrive in the middle of my dining room under the chandelier Lorraine picked out in 1987. Grief makes a man inventive in defense of what he cannot bear to lose. At one point, I reached for the gravy boat and realized it was half empty already. Mara still had not served herself any. "Get some gravy before Mike drinks the rest," I said to her, trying for lightness. She looked up as if surprised to be addressed directly. Daniel answered first. "She's fine." I smiled because I did not know yet what else to do with my mouth. I was asking Mara. "Really, I'm okay," she said quickly. "I'll get some in a second." But she did not. After dinner, there was the usual movement of chairs and plates, the children asking to be excused. Mike going outside to take a call he claimed was work, and probably was not Daniel collecting dishes before anyone else could touch them. I would have liked in retrospect to say that suspicion sharpened me instantly. The truth is, it made me clumsy. I dropped a fork. I forgot where I had put the foil for the lemon bars. I followed Mara into the kitchen once with the intention of saying plainly, "Ellie said something that worried me. Are you all right?" And found Daniel already there at the sink towel in hand saying to Mara, in that low, smooth tone the carrots were a good save. A save. From what Mara only nodded, I stood there with the fork still in my hand and felt absurdly like a guest in my own kitchen. Dad Daniel said, "Can you grab the dessert plates from the buffet?" It was not a dismissal on paper. In the room, it worked like one. By the time I set the plates down, Mara had gone back toward Pa and toward the mudroom again. Ellie had settled on the living room rug with colored pencils and paper. Ben had built 2 impossible towers from old wooden blocks Lorraine kept in the cedar chest for grandchildren who had once seemed like a distant theory. Mike came back in, smelling of cold, and looked from Daniel to me to the kitchen and said, "Everything under control." Daniel smiled. Always. Mike did not smile back. That must be restful. We had lemon bars and coffee in the living room because Lorraine always said Sunday dinner had 2 endings, one at the table, one in the chairs after. The lamps were on by then, low and warm. Rain had started somewhere outside, faint on the windows. Ellie sat on the floor with her knees tucked under her and drew a house with a yellow door and too many windows. I watched her, trying not to watch her. At one point she looked up and said, "Grandpa." "Yes, sweetheart. Do all garages have chairs in them?" The room did not stop, but something in me did. Daniel was across from us, with coffee in his hand. He set the cup down carefully on a coaster before answering. "What kind of question is that?" Ellie lowered her eyes to the paper. "Just one." Mike looked at me. Mara was in the kitchen again, rinsing something that did not need rinsing yet. "Some do," I said. "Depends what people use them for." Ellie nodded as if I had told her something useful for later. Daniel picked up his cup. "You've got to stop turning every room into a clubhouse peanut. Your mother can't find anything as it is." He said it gently, too gently. The words themselves were harmless. It was the speed with which he stepped between her question and the room that bothered me. The speed and the way Ellie's shoulders folded inward after. After they left the house had the flattened feeling it gets when a day has ended wrong but the furniture is still trying to pretend otherwise. Mike stayed long enough to help me carry the serving dishes back to the kitchen. He stacked plates, ran water into the roasting pan, and finally said without looking at me, "Something's off with him." "With who?" "With Daniel." I dried a platter slowly. "He's always been a little controlling. That's not what I mean." I waited. Mike set down the stack in his arms. "Did you not see Mara barely sit all night?" She said she was fine. He gave me the kind of look younger sons reserve for fathers they still respect enough to be disappointed in. "Yeah. People always tell the truth when the person they're married to is in the room." I put the towel down. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he acts like she's one of the appliances. That's a rotten thing to say. It's a rude thing to say. Rude and rotten aren't the same." I almost told him what Ellie had whispered to me. I did not. And the reason shames me now. Partly I was not ready to hear it back in another voice. Partly I did not want Mike with his bluntness and history of being the family's truth-teller at inconvenient times to make the thing real before I had managed to fit it into a shape I could live with. So I said only, "You think too badly of your brother sometimes." Mike snorted softly. "And you think too well of him because he knows how to clear a table." He left 5 minutes later. I stood at the front window and watched his tail lights back out of the drive and go. Then the house was mine again, which is another way of saying Lorraine's absence got bigger. I cleaned in the old order because that was what I knew. Plates first, silver soaking but not too long, leftovers into glass containers, linens folded, counters wiped in broad, wet circles. I did not like going to bed with a kitchen that looked defeated. The rain had picked up, the mudroom window showed only black and the blurred reflection of the bench. I took Mara's lemon bars from where Daniel had left them in the mudroom and put them where desserts belonged. Her purse was gone from the hook, so was her cardigan. The interior garage door was closed, the latch turned horizontal. I stared at it longer than the moment deserved. Then I opened the pantry alcove to put away the extra napkins and saw Lorraine's recipe cards stacked in their wooden file. Edge's worn tabs yellowed. Chicken and gravy, potatoes, green beans with shallot. Lemon bars in Mara's younger, rounder handwriting clipped to the side with one of Lorraine's old brass clips. The sight of that handwriting there among Lorraine's cards hurt me in a way I had not expected. Not because I minded Mara being included, because it looked suddenly like Succession, as if life had gone on organizing itself after death without asking whether the dead had approved the arrangement. I took Lorraine's chicken card out and read it, though I knew it by heart. At the bottom, in her cramped hand, she had written years ago, "Seat the cook first, or she won't taste a thing till it's cold." I stood there with the card in my hand, and had one of those memory strikes that come so complete they briefly abolish the room you are in. It was a Sunday in November, maybe 15 years earlier. The boys were both home, younger and louder, and Mara was newly pregnant with Ellie and still trying too hard to be effortless. She had started carrying dishes before Lorraine sat down, eager smiling, saying she didn't mind. Daniel had let her. Lorraine took the bowl from her, set it back on the counter, and said in a voice so light only someone married to her would have heard the steel underneath, "No woman at my table serves dinner. She doesn't get to eat hot." Daniel rolled his eyes. Mara laughed. I laughed too, because that was what men do when a wife is right in a way that embarrasses them. But later that night, brushing my teeth, Lorraine said, "Tom, don't ever mistake politeness in a young woman for comfort." I remember spitting rinsing, looking at her in the mirror and saying, "You worry too much." She looked at me for a long second and then went to fold the towels. I had not thought of that in years. The pantry seemed smaller around me. The card in my hand felt newly heavy, as if memory itself had mass. I put it back carefully and shut the door. The kitchen was nearly done then. All that remained was the roasting pan and a few odds and ends. Daniel had left his bakery box on the counter by the wall phone, and beside it, half tucked under a folded dish towel, was a yellow legal pad. I might not have noticed it if the towel had covered it properly. What caught my eye first was the slant of Daniel's handwriting. He had Lorraine's compactness without her grace. His letters looked like they were trying not to waste time. I pulled the towel back. At the top of the page he had written Sunday/Dads. Beneath it was a list. 4:05 arrive, 4:08. Dessert in mudroom 412, dad gravy, 4:14 kids wash/seats, 4:16 beans, 4:18 prayer, 4:20 car 422 reset 4:24 table clear line 500 dessert out. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. Beans, reset, not potatoes, not bread, not check oven, not anything a man jots down because age makes him forgetful. This was not shopping, it was sequence. I looked at the clock over the mudroom door, then at the page again, then at the gravy boat drying upside down by the sink. My first thought was foolishly ordinary, that Daniel was over-planning Sunday dinner, the way some men over-plan vacations and taxes, and where to park at ball games. My second thought came colder. If M meant Mara, and of course it meant Mara, then what exactly had required resetting, and why was it written down before the evening even happened? Rain tapped the window harder. The radiator knocked once in the dining room. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard gave a soft, settling creak like a person shifting weight in the dark. I stood in my own kitchen holding my son's yellow legal pad and felt for the first time since Lorraine died, not lonely in that house, but unwelcome. On the line after 4:22, Daniel had drawn a small check mark in dark ink. Beside him, reset. I do not know how long I stood there with that yellow legal pad in my hand. Long enough for the kitchen windows to darken completely. Long enough for the sink water to go from hot to merely warm around the roasting pan. Long enough for the old house to shift into its nighttime voice, all soft settling sounds, and radiator ticks, and the far hum of the refrigerator that Lorraine used to say made the place feel less empty after the children were gone. I read the page again. Sunday/Dads. 4:05. Arrive. 4:08. Dessert in mudroom. 4:12 Dad gravy. 4:14 kids wash/seats. 4:16 M beans. 4:18 prayer. 4:20 carve. 4:22 Emma reset. 4:24 table clear line 5. 00 dessert out. There was another line half-started below it and scribbled through as if Daniel had changed his mind, before finishing M check tone. I looked at those words until they became stranger instead of clearer. M reset. Check tone. A man can force almost anything into an innocent shape if he needs the world to remain familiar enough to sleep in. I told myself M might mean minute. I told myself reset might refer to the table, the microwave, the children, the timing of the beans after all. I told myself Daniel was just the kind of man who put language to every moving part of a day, and that people like that often sounded colder on paper than they meant to in life. Then I looked at the line above it. M beans. No, M meant Mara. My chest gave a slow, unpleasant beat that seemed to come from somewhere lower than the heart. I set the pad back where I had found it and laid the dish towel over it exactly as it had been. Then I changed my mind, pulled the towel away again, read the page once more and copied the lines onto the back of one of Mike's abandoned legal envelopes from Christmas fund paperwork that still sat in the junk drawer by the phone. My handwriting shook enough that I had to steady my wrist against the counter. I had never before in all the years of my marriage and fatherhood felt the need to take notes against my own son. That was the first cost. The second came a few minutes later when I carried the gravy boat to the dining room buffet and could not bring myself to put it away. It had already changed shape in my mind. Until that evening, it had belonged to memory in the uncomplicated way certain objects do after a spouse dies. It was silver and dented and useful, and it held Lorraine's handprint in it more reliably than some photographs I owned. Now it carried something else. Not proof yet, not even accusation, only alarm. The boat had crossed the threshold before Mara did. That fact would have sounded ridiculous to almost anyone else in America. To me, it sat in my mind like a cracked tooth, too small to explain and impossible not to feel. I left it on the buffet under the dining room lamp and went to bed badly. At my age, bad sleep is less an event than a climate. You lie down and think you have surrendered, but some part of the mind remains sitting upright in a chair with its coat on. I drifted off for an hour, maybe then woke at 1:20 with the line M reset in my head as clearly as if somebody had whispered it at the side of the bed. Lorraine's side of the mattress was cold, as it had been for 18 months. But there are nights when absence can still feel newly arranged, as if the dead have only just stepped out of the room and forgotten to say where they were going. I got up, put on my robe and walked downstairs in the dark. The house at night is a different sort of evidence. Daylight makes old rooms explain themselves. At night, the hallways become decisions. The banister knows every hand that ever slid down it. The floorboards report weight. The mud-room window reflects more house than weather. I stood in the kitchen with only the stove light on and looked toward the closed door to the mud-room. Nothing about it was theatrical. A white painted door, brass knob, the old hook where Lorraine hung aprons, a strip of runner rug with a blue border. But because I had seen Daniel's notes, because Ellie had whispered what she had whispered, the whole line of sight now felt arranged rather than lived in. That door no longer connected kitchen to utility room. It connected visible family life to somewhere off stage. The rain had stopped. Water ticked from the eaves outside. The refrigerator motor clicked on. I nearly opened the mudroom door. Then and there, though, what I expected to find, I could not have said. The room would be empty. The bench, the cubbies, the window over the sink where Lorraine once rooted cuttings in old jelly jars. Beyond it, the interior garage door. Perhaps a chair. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps only my own grief, standing in a place it had no business standing. I did not open it. That was not fear exactly. It was something weaker and more exhausting, the old instinct to wait for a version of trouble that came with a name and a shape. A decent man could say out loud without sounding cracked in the head. I made tea. I did not want, stood at the counter, and remembered a thing Lorraine had said to me years earlier that had annoyed me at the time. It was after one of those big family Sundays when both boys were home and the grandchildren were babies still being passed around like blessings people were afraid to drop. Daniel had reorganized the dishwasher while Mara was upstairs nursing Ellie. I laughed and said he must have inherited his mother's standards. Lorraine, drying a platter, said, "No, mine are for dishes. His are for people." I asked what that meant. She shrugged in the way she did when deciding whether I was worth the effort of further explanation. He likes order best when other people are carrying it. I remember feeling protective of him immediately, as fathers do, even when the criticism comes from the woman who knows their sons more clearly than they do. I said she was too hard on him, that he was conscientious that every family needed one person who noticed what still had to be done. She said nothing for a while, then only, "That's not the same thing as kindness, Tom." I had forgotten that conversation until the middle of the night in my kitchen, standing barefoot on old oak with cold tea in my hand. The memory did not comfort me. It rearranged the present. By morning, I had convinced myself of nothing except that I needed to see Ellie away from the Sunday table. My excuse presented itself by 9:30 when Mara texted to ask if I still had the little springform pan she thought she'd left after Christmas. I wrote back that I did, and after a minute wrote again. If Ellie's free after school, I was planning biscuits and strawberries. She can help if she wants. I thought asking for both children would muddy the purpose. Ben talked continuously enough to fill all available air. Ellie left pockets in the room where truth might fit. Mara did not answer for 20 minutes. When she did, it was only, "She'd love that. I can bring her by around 3:45. No heart, no smile, no extra line about how nice that was. Just a clean sentence as if it had been checked before being sent. I spent the morning in the old practical work of a weekday house. I changed the sheets in the guest room, though no guest was due. I paid the gas bill. I took the chicken carcass from Sunday and made stock out of habit. At noon, I found myself in the pantry alcove holding Lorraine's recipe card for biscuits, even though I did not need it. The alcove is not a room exactly. More a cut-in beside the kitchen with 2 deep shelves, a narrow counter, and an old peg rail underneath where Lorraine hung aprons and market bags. It was where she stood when she wanted 3 minutes of order between one task and the next. She kept the recipe box there, the string, the spare candles, the clothespins, the good scissors nobody was allowed to use for wrapping paper. After she died, I discovered there was not an inch of that space she had organized without intention. The shortest women often do the most ingenious work with reach. The biscuit card was soft at the corners. Flour ghosts still lived in the fibers. At the top, in her small slanted hand, "Don't overwork. People always do." I laughed once through my nose when I saw that, then had the miserable sensation of laughing in a room where the only other person who understood the joke had died. I made the dough exactly her way. Cold butter, not softened. buttermilk from the back of the fridge. Quick hands. When I cut the rounds, the smell of flour and baking powder took me back so sharply that I had to grip the edge of the counter. Not to some holiday, to a Tuesday in April 15 years earlier. The boys were in and out with jobs and babies and obligations. Mara was new enough to the family that she still offered help before she knew where things went. She had come in on a weekday with Ellie in a car seat and circles under her eyes and said she was sorry to impose. Lorraine, who had no patience for young mothers, apologizing for needing company, put the baby on the kitchen table in her basket, mixed biscuit dough, and asked Mara whether Daniel was helping at night. Mara smiled in that polite, reflexive way and said Daniel had very high standards for routine because routine made him feel calm. Lorraine cut the biscuits in silence for a few seconds, then said calm for who? At the time, I had found that unfair. Nosy, even. I had walked in from the garage with tulip bulbs and felt that familiar irritation husbands sometimes feel when wives identify a problem before the men in the room have agreed to admit there is one. Mara laughed it off. Lorraine did not press. But now, remembering it with the smell of biscuits in my kitchen and the yellow legal pad still alive in my mind, I understood the question had not been casual at all. Calm for who? The biscuits rose in the oven. I set strawberries in sugar. I laid out the little white plates with the blue rim. I did all of it more carefully than necessary because care can still disguise dread if you let it. At 3:48, Mara's car pulled into the drive. I met them at the front door. Mara had on the same navy pea coat she'd worn Sunday, though the day was milder. Ellie came in first, carrying her school backpack with both straps still on, and gave me a hug that felt more tired than eager. "Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Grandpa." Mara smiled. "I can only stay a minute. I have to get back before Ben's out of soccer club." "No problem." She held on to Ellie's shoulder a second longer than needed. Her face looked thinner in daylight. Not bruised, not battered, nothing dramatic enough to simplify the matter for me. Only thinned by some invisible friction. "You good with biscuits?" she asked Ellie. Ellie nodded. Mara looked at me. There was a second there, no more than that, when I thought she might say something unscripted. Instead, she said, "She's had a long day. We'll keep it quiet." "Thanks." Her gaze drifted past me into the hall to the kitchen beyond, as if checking the mood of the house itself. Then she bent and kissed Ellie's head. "Be good for Grandpa." Ellie said I am always good. That might have been funny. Mara did not smile. When the front door closed behind her, Ellie stood in the hall listening after the retreating car before she took off her shoes. "Strawberries first or biscuits first?" I asked. "Biscuits." "All right." She followed me into the kitchen and climbed onto the chair Lorraine used to call the thinking seat, the one by the window where all our children learned to peel apples and shell peas and do long division badly. I set the bowl of cooled biscuits between us and handed her a clean tea towel to line the bread basket. She arranged them with grave precision, then stopped halfway through and looked toward the mudroom. "What is it?" I asked. She blinked. "Nothing." The kitchen clock ticked. A truck passed outside. In the silence after I heard how carefully she was listening. "Ellie," I said as lightly as I could, "do you like helping your mom with Sunday dinner?" She shrugged. "That a yes or a no?" "It depends." "On what?" Her fingers worried the towel edge. "On if it's a smooth Sunday." The phrase was so adult in her small voice it struck me almost as hard as the whisper had. "What's a smooth Sunday?" She looked at me, then away. "One where nobody gets off." "Off?" She nodded. "In what way?" She was quiet long enough that I almost filled the silence for her, which is another adult failure around children. Then she said, "Just off. Like too slow. Or if Ben spills, or if Mommy forgets something, or if Daddy says it's getting messy." I kept my voice even. "And what happens if it gets messy?" She twisted the hem of her cardigan around one finger. "Ellie." She did not look up. "Daddy fixes it." "How?" She went very still. That was when the oven timer beeped. It was only the biscuit timer, an ordinary sharp electronic sound, from the counter 3 feet away. Ellie flinched as if someone had struck the table. Not hard. Hard enough. My whole body went cold and careful. "It's all right," I said at once. "Just biscuits." Her eyes filled instantly, not with crying exactly, but with the pressure of it. She gave a fast, embarrassed shake of her head the way children do when they think they have already made too much of themselves. "I know," she whispered. I got up, turned off the timer, and opened the oven. Heat came out in a rich wave, carrying butter and flour and browned milk. The domestic beauty of it was almost unbearable. How many times had Lorraine done this? How many times had I stood in warm, harmless kitchens, believing kitchens were by nature safe places? When I turned back, Ellie had taken the purple pencil from behind her ear and was drawing on the back of a junk mail envelope. "What are you making?" I asked. "A floor plan." "For what?" She angled the paper away out of reflex, then reconsidered and slid it toward me. It was a child's drawing, but children are often more accurate than adults because they do not yet know what to omit to protect a story. The kitchen was a square with a table. The mudroom was a rectangle with hooks. Beyond it, a larger square labeled garage. There was an X in one corner. A little chair, a box. A door between the mudroom and garage, drawn twice dark. "What's the X?" She said nothing. "What's the chair?" "Just a chair." "And the box, freezer?" The word sat between us. The old upright freezer in Daniel and Mara's garage had once belonged to Lorraine. We bought it in 1998 when Mike was eating like 3 boys and a locust plague. White enamel, 1 rust bloom at the bottom seam, rubber gasket replaced twice. Lorraine stored extra stock and pie crusts in it. Later, Daniel took it when they bought the split level in Worthington because Mara liked buying meat in bulk on sale. I had helped load it into a rented truck the year they moved. I remembered Daniel snapping the dolly straps too tight and Lorraine saying not everything had to be cinched till it stopped breathing. I had laughed. Ellie tapped the paper with her pencil. "The freezer's loud. Loud how it hums." I could hear my own heartbeat by then. "Why are you drawing the garage, sweetheart?" Her mouth worked before any sound came out. "Because some houses have rooms you don't have to count." I did not understand her. She seemed to know that and pressed on, speaking very low, eyes still on the paper. "At our house you count if Mommy's in the kitchen, or bathroom, or upstairs, or in the garage, because if she's in the garage, you have to know." My hands tightened on the chair back. "Know what?" But that was as far as she could go. The tears came then soundless and furious at themselves. She swiped at them with both fists as if crying were an inconvenience she had not scheduled. I went to her and held her carefully, not too close at first. After a moment, she let herself fold into me. She smelled of school hallway and pencil shavings and cold air trapped in wool. It broke something open in me to feel how small she still was. "I'm sorry," she said into my shirt. "You have nothing to be sorry for. I didn't mean to get upset." That sentence from an 8-year-old landed in me like a stone. After a while, she pulled back and asked in a shaky voice whether she could have strawberries anyway. Of course. We ate them at the table with warm biscuits split open and too much sugar, and I let the conversation drift to spelling tests and whether Ben's soccer coach really knew anything about soccer and which of her classmates chewed pencils down to stubs. But the room had changed. The kitchen now contained not only Lorraine's absence and my questions, but a child's map. When Mara came to pick her up, I did not mention any of it. That was not courage. It was strategy, though I did not yet have the nerve to call it that. Mara looked from Ellie's face to mine as soon as she came through the door. I saw the quick scan in her, the maternal inventory, eyes red or not, body loose or tight evidence of disclosure or trouble. She kissed Ellie, thanked me for the biscuits, and asked if everything had gone smoothly. Smoothly. The same word Ellie had used. It was fine, I said. Mara nodded once. Not relieved. Not exactly. At the door, as Ellie was pulling on her shoes, she looked up at me and said with a care that did not belong in a child, "Grandpa." "Yes. Do all houses have locks on the inside doors?" Mara's hand stopped in the act of zipping Ellie's coat. I answered too quickly because waiting would have been its own answer. "Some do." Ellie considered that. "Do they have them? So people can't get out," Mara said Ellie. It was only the child's name. Nothing more. But the tone was all closure, all line drawing, all don't. Ellie bent over her shoe. Mara did not look at me. She gets ideas when she's tired. I said, "She asked a question." Mara's mouth tightened. Yes, that was all. They left a minute later. I stood on the porch and watched Mara guide Ellie into the passenger seat instead of the back, as if wanting her where she could be seen. I went inside and found I could not bear the kitchen for almost an hour. So I walked the house. The front parlor, first mostly unused, now except at Christmas. Then the dining room where the chairs sat tucked in at proper angles as if Sunday had not happened there. Then the pantry alcove. Then the hall. Then because I was a coward and tired of being one the mudroom. It smelled faintly of damp wool and laundry soap. Children's boots lined the tray by the wall. Lorraine's old cubbies held one of Ben's red shin guards, a baseball cap Mike left behind at Thanksgiving, 2 mismatched gloves, a dead flashlight, and a roll of dog waste bags from 3 Dogs Go that no one had ever thrown away. The bench cushion had sunk in the middle. Nothing in the room declared itself, yet I could not shake the feeling that the space had become more about passage than pause. The things in it seemed arranged not for living, but for movement through. The interior garage door was shut. I put my hand on the knob and stood there long enough to become aware of the fine chill in the metal. Then I opened it. The garage at Daniel's house was not my garage, obviously, but mine still held its own map of what a garage meant. Tools, ladder, potting soil, old paint bicycles, too small to ride and too sentimental to discard. The one at my house smelled of mower gas and cardboard and cold concrete. Daniel and Mara's, in my imagination, had always remained some version of that. Harmless overflow, practical mess. Now standing in my own mudroom, staring into my own garage, I found myself testing the word harmless as if it had gone unreliable in my mouth. I stepped inside. The concrete floor ran cold through my socks. The old freezer I kept now was smaller than the one Daniel had taken, but it made the same low, steady hum, the sound Ellie had named without emphasis. Gardening tools on hooks. Recycling bin. A metal shelving unit with canning jars I hadn't used since Lorraine died, because preserving for one felt like an accusation. A folding chair against the wall by the freezer. I looked at that chair for a long time. It was only a chair. Aluminum webbed seat, the kind people carried to Little League games and forgot to bring back in before rain. I had put it there last autumn while changing the storm windows. Yet because Ellie had drawn a chair in her map, because the freezer hummed in the same key she had remembered the sight of it, now looked arranged by another mind entirely. I shut the door again and went back into the kitchen feeling foolish and not at all reassured. The next person I spoke to was Mike. He came by Wednesday evening under the excuse of dropping off a briefcase he had left in the hall closet 2 weeks earlier. He found me at the kitchen table with my glasses low on my nose and Daniel's copied schedule folded inside the electric bill. Mike was not a graceful man, but he noticed quickly. He threw his keys on the table and said, "You look like hell. Always nice to see you." Same. He opened the fridge without asking and found himself a ginger ale. "What happened?" I almost lied. Then I handed him the copied lines from the legal envelope. He read them, once frowned, read them again. "What is this Daniel's notepad?" "Original. I copied it." Mike looked up sharply. "You copied notes out of your own kitchen like you were building a case." "I don't know what I'm building." "Sure you do." I hated how quickly he could get there. Ellie said something Sunday. His face changed, then all the irony gone out of it. What I told him. Not every detail, not the full feel of her weight against my sleeve because some things lose blood when repeated. But enough. The whisper. Mara coming through the mudroom with beans that should have been hot. The timer beep, the question about garages, the drawing, the flinch. Mike listened with his jaw tight and his ginger ale unopened in his hand. When I finished, he said I knew it. The certainty in him made me angry. You knew no such thing. I knew something was rotten. That is not the same. No, he said. It's worse. He sat down across from me and flattened the paper against the table with both hands. Do you remember Christmas Eve 2 years ago? Daniel sent Mara back outside because the pies were sliding in the car. I searched my memory. A blur of coats and wrapping paper and the old song station Lorraine liked. That was nothing. She was out there 15 minutes. It was cold. The pies. The pies, Mike said, were in cardboard boxes. He stood inside with a drink while she hauled them in one at a time. I felt the useless reflex rise in me even then. Maybe he was getting the kids settled. Mike looked at me with something like pity and something less forgiving. Dad. He's always delegated warmth. I said nothing. Mike rubbed his jaw. I saw him 6 months ago at their place. I stopped by to drop off some forms for him to sign. Mara was in the side yard crying. He told me she'd gotten overwhelmed and needed air. Ellie was sitting on the back step holding a blanket. I let it pass because I didn't have anything but a bad feeling, and because every time I say he's controlling everybody, acts like I'm just jealous, he alphabetizes his spice rack. The kitchen seemed to pull tighter around us. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Would you have listened? I had no answer to that. He opened the ginger ale and took a swallow. What do you want to do? I was a father. I was still, however, inconveniently Daniel's father. There are terrible privileges inside that sentence and terrible weaknesses. I don't know yet. That means you're hoping for an explanation that lets you go back to Sunday. I looked at him. Mike went on more quietly. You can't. He left not long after. The briefcase was in the hall closet exactly where he said it would be. I handed it to him and stood on the porch as he went down the steps. Halfway to his car, he turned and said, Ask somebody outside the family. Who? He shrugged. Somebody who's heard Ellie say things before. That sentence stayed with me all night. The outside person, it turned out, already existed. I only had to become the sort of man willing to approach her. I learned about Dr. Ruiz by accident and then understood it had not been accidental at all. On Thursday morning, Mara called to ask whether I happened to know if Ellie had left a blue cardigan at my place. In the course of the conversation, she said Ellie had a therapy appointment after school and could not come by if I'd planned anything. She said therapy the way people say orthodontist now, casual and modern, but there was a strain under it. Is she all right? I asked. Just some anxiety stuff, Mara said too quickly. Stomach aches, school nerves, who's she seeing? There was a pause. A child therapist in Upper Arlington. I let that sit. Then I said, Mara. Another pause. Yes. If there is something I need to know about my granddaughter, you can tell me. What came back was not truth, but something that cost her effort. I could hear it. She's been keyed up lately about what she worries. That's not an answer. No, Mara said softly. It isn't. I sat down at the kitchen table because suddenly I needed to. The silence between us lengthened until I thought she might hang up. Then she said, Her therapist's name is Hannah Ruiz. Mara, I know what Ellie said to you Sunday. There it was. Not all of it. Enough. My hand tightened on the receiver. Did she tell you she said it? She didn't have to. Then tell me what it meant. I heard her breathing. A car passed outside her end of the line. Somewhere near her, a door opened and closed. It meant, she said carefully, that children repeat things they don't fully understand. The wording was wrong. Too arranged, too prepared not to be believed and yet required to be spoken anyway. "Mara, look at me in your mind for a second," I said. "Do you want me to believe that?" Her answer took so long that when it came it was almost a whisper. "I want everyone to get through this week." That was not an answer either. It was worse. I did not sleep much Thursday night. Friday afternoon I drove to Upper Arlington under a sky the color of old dishwater and sat in my car outside a brick professional building for 20 minutes like a man considering whether to commit a small crime. Asking questions about a child's therapy felt dangerously close to trespass. On the other hand, doing nothing had already begun to feel like cooperation. Dr. Hannah Ruiz's office occupied the second floor above an insurance broker and a tax preparer. Neutral carpeting, framed prints of trees and lakes that had been chosen, I suppose, to imply calm without requiring interest. A low bookshelf in the waiting room held puzzles, picture books. A jar of broken crayons sorted by color. And one of those wooden bead mazes every child I have ever known seems to dislike on principle. The receptionist was young enough to call me sir in the professional rather than deferential sense. I said I was Eleanor Mercer's grandfather and asked whether Dr. Ruiz had a minute to speak. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment. "No." "Is this in regard to Ellie's care?" "Yes." She gave me a careful look. "I can ask, but Dr. Ruiz can't discuss a minor patient without consent." "I understand." She disappeared down the hall. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. A boy of about 10 sat with his mother in the corner, knees jiggling, reading the back of a board game box without seeing it. I looked at the bead maze and thought of Ellie flinching at the timer. After a few minutes, a woman in a navy sweater and dark slacks came into the doorway and said, "Mr. Mercer." She was in her early 50s, I guessed, with graying hair pulled back, and the kind of face that gave away very little while still seeming kind. She led me into a small office with 2 upholstered chairs, a child's table, and shelves arranged with games and books. The blinds were half open against the gray afternoon. On the desk sat a dark blue fountain pen and a legal pad turned upside down. I appreciated that immediately, though I do not know why. "Please sit," she said. I did. She remained standing a moment, not as a power play, but because she was deciding how to make boundaries clear, without humiliating me. I knew the type. Lorraine and I had both admired such people all our lives. "I can't discuss Ellie's treatment in detail without parental consent," she said, "but I can listen to any concern you have about her well-being." I nodded. "That's fair." So I told her enough. Not all. Not the copied notes, not yet. The whisper at Sunday dinner. The drawing. The reaction to the timer. The question about inside locks. Mara's non-answer. I heard my own voice changing as I spoke, less defensive, more ashamed. Dr. Ruiz listened without interrupting. Once when I said I might be reading too much into a child's words because grief can distort a house, she said quietly, "It can. It can also sharpen what people have been training themselves not to see." When I finished, she sat down across from me and folded her hands. "Has Ellie ever said anything like this to you before?" I asked. Her face did not change. "I can't answer that directly." "Can you answer it indirectly?" One corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Mr. Mercer, what I can say is that when children describe frightening family dynamics, the most important question is rarely whether they used perfect adult language. The more important question is whether the pattern of what they describe is consistent." Something in my chest dropped. "Consistent," I repeated. She held my gaze. "Children often misname things. They are less likely to invent a system." I looked down at my hands. "My son," I said after a moment, "is a competent man. Organized. Calm. He took over a great deal after my wife died. I'm aware those traits can look different from different angles. I also know families can tell stories about each other that become truer with repetition than with evidence." "Yes," she said. I heard the permission in it and kept going, though each word cost more than the last. My late wife used to say Daniel liked order in a hard way. I thought she was being unfair. I'm beginning to wonder whether what I called steadiness was something else. And if that's true, I stopped. Dr. Ruiz waited. If that's true, I said, then I have been sitting at the head of my own table while something wrong happened, under the cover of a ritual I thought I was preserving for my wife. There it was. The first time I had said a version of the truth aloud in a room where no one was family. Dr. Ruiz took off her glasses and held them in one hand. "I'm sorry," she said. It was not a comfort sentence. It was recognition. "Can you tell me whether Ellie is frightened again, that measured boundary? I can tell you that Ellie is vigilant." The word went through me like weather. About what? She tracks adult states carefully. She anticipates escalation before it is visible to others. She uses language suggesting repeated exposure to a household pattern of correction. I could not speak for a few seconds. "Repeated exposure," I said finally. "Yes? Are we talking about arguments?" She chose her words with painful care. "We are talking about a child who appears to believe that when a certain adult is off, that adult may be removed from ordinary family space." I thought of the mudroom door, the drawing, the chair by the freezer in my own garage, suddenly lit from within by imagination. My mouth had gone dry, removed. Dr. Ruiz did not rescue me from the word. I would strongly encourage, she said, that any adult in Ellie's life who is seeing concerning patterns respond to them as patterns, not incidents. I'm her grandfather. Yes, I have no legal authority over what happens in that house. That may be true, she said. You still have moral authority. Those are not the same, but children often experience them as equally real. I do not know why that nearly undid me more than anything else, she said. When I stood to leave, my knees felt older than they had that morning. At the door, I turned back. One more thing, I said. Do children ever exaggerate to test the adults around them? She met my eyes steadily. Yes, they do. They also learn very young which truths adults are willing to hear. Outside, the sky had darkened toward rain. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and did not start it. I had come there, I think, still hoping for something narrower, a misunderstanding, a child's dramatic phrase, a family strain that could be named and corrected without reclassifying my whole son. Instead, I had been handed something colder and more ruinous: pattern consistency removal vigilance. On the drive home, I took the side streets instead of the highway and passed through older neighborhoods with deep porches and maple roots, cracking sidewalks, and little signs of ordinary Friday life. A boy dragging a hockey bag, an older woman bringing in groceries, two men in a driveway arguing over a leaf blower. Every house looked solvable from the street. Every house looked private. When I got home, there was a foil-covered dish on my side porch. Janice Holloway from next door did that sometimes, usually with scalloped potatoes or church supper leftovers when she had made too much, which was often because she cooked for the dead, as if they still might stop by. The dish held chicken divan, still warm. A post-it on top read, "Made too much. Don't let it go to waste. J." I carried it inside, then went back out and crossed to her porch before I could decide not to. Janice answered in socks and a sweatshirt, surprised but pleased to see me until she took in my face. "Tom, you all right?" "I don't know," I said. "Can I ask you something strange?" She stepped back at once. "You can ask me something criminal if you want." "I don't promise I'll answer." Her living room smelled like lemon cleaner and old hymnals. She sat me down, took her own seat across from me, and folded her hands over one knee. "This is about Daniel and Mara," I said. The lightness went out of her. Not dramatically, just enough. That was its own answer. "What about them?" she asked. I watched her closely then, because by this point I had learned that what people knew often first appeared in the fraction of a second before they chose their expression. "Have you ever seen anything over there that troubled you?" Janice looked toward the window. Her house sits just close enough to mine, and Daniel's just close enough to hers that side porches sometimes become unintentional witnesses. Troubled me how I could not say garage. I still could not say locked. So I said Mara. Janice inhaled slowly and let it out. I have seen enough to dislike the feeling of it, she said. Not enough to swear to something in court? What did you see? She smoothed the front of her sweatshirt with both hands, a small nervous habit I had watched her perform at funerals before saying things families did not want, said in front of casseroles. Maybe 6 months ago, she said I walked over with a dish. Broccoli thing. You know the one. I went around the side because their front walk was being salted, and I didn't want to slip. The garage door was open maybe a foot off the ground. Not all the way. I could hear the freezer running. I heard Ellie talking. My whole body had gone still. I looked in, Janice said. Only because I heard a child Tom and because I'm nosy enough to still be useful sometimes. Mara was in there sitting in a folding chair by the freezer with a blanket around her shoulders. Ellie was standing beside her. The interior door was shut. Not latched that I could tell. Just shut. What did Mara say? Janice looked embarrassed. She smiled. Said she'd be in a minute. Said Daniel was trying to get Ben calmed down. I heard myself ask, did you believe her? No. The room tilted slightly. Why not? Janice's voice softened. Because I had a sister who said she was fine for 12 straight years. Women sitting in cold places with blankets on them and smiles that come too quick. I don't trust that picture. I looked at my hands. I should have said something, she said. To who? To somebody. She met my eyes. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. Then I saw Ellie and decided that sentence wasn't as decent as I'd always wanted it to be. That sat between us. When was this exactly? I asked. I can find the text if you need it. She got up, fetched her phone from the side table, squinted at it, and after a minute said, October 17th. I texted Mara after I got home and told her if she needed anything I was around. She answered, thank you, just one of those evenings. One of those evenings. The phrase made me want for the first time to put my fist through something. Janice looked up from her phone. Tom. Yes. You look like you're trying not to be sick. I am. She set the phone down. What's happening? I did not answer fully. I could not yet bear the whole thing in spoken language. But I told her enough that by the time I left, the outline of my old belief had cracked beyond repair. Daniel had not merely taken over Sunday dinner after Lorraine died because I needed help and he was the son best suited to provide it. He had occupied it. That was the shift, not help, occupancy. He had stepped into the house's most sacred surviving ritual and made himself its traffic cop, its interpreter, its guardian of smoothness. And because I was grieving and grateful and old enough to confuse competence with goodness, I had called that devotion. By the time I got home, the rain had started again. Fine, cold spring rain, hardly visible except where it silvered the driveway. The house smelled of the chicken divan Janice had sent over, and for one wild second I hated the smell because it was kindness arriving in a covered dish the same way so much bad news does in American neighborhoods. I went to the pantry alcove and took out Lorraine's recipe box. Not because I needed a recipe, because I needed her. That is not mystical. The dead do not return when summoned by index cards. But sometimes the only way to think clearly in grief is to put your hands where the person you trusted most used to put hers. I found the chicken card, then the gravy, then behind them a card for Sunday table order. Not a recipe at all, but one of Lorraine's practical notes from the years when both boys were teenagers and company was constant. Her handwriting read, warm plates, children, nearest help, older guests away from draft, no passing till cook sits, don't let Daniel rush service, he calls hurry efficiency when he's anxious. I sat down on the little stool in the alcove because my legs had stopped being negotiable. The card blurred, then sharpened again. Don't let Daniel rush service. Not let. Not if. Not someday watch for. Don't let. There are discoveries that add to what you know and discoveries that indict what you refuse to understand when it was still possible to ask the person who knew best what she meant. This was the second kind. I had spent 18 months telling myself that keeping Lorraine's table meant loving her well after death. Now her own hand was telling me she had tried in life to warn me about the exact son I had trusted to carry the ritual forward. The grief in that did not feel poetic. It felt humiliating. I do not know how long I sat there with the card in my hand. Eventually, the kitchen clock struck 6 and I realized I had not turned on the dining room lamp. The house was dark around me except for the over-sink light and the low glow from the stove hood, and in that dimness, the pantry alcove felt less like storage and more like witness. My phone rang. Mara. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Hello? Her voice was hushed. Tom. Yes. I just wanted to ask, did Ellie say anything upsetting today? Straight to it. I closed my eyes. Why are you asking me that instead of asking what kind of afternoon she had? Silence. Then very softly. Because I know my daughter. That isn't an answer either. I heard something in the background at her end. A door. Footsteps, maybe. Her voice dropped further. She asked me if inside locks are normal, I said. Still silence. Mara. She doesn't always understand what she sees. Then, help me understand it. I could hear her breathing. Then so low I might have missed it if the house had been louder, she said, He says the garage is calmer. The sentence made the room around me physically colder. He says, yes. Do you? A pause. Another sound in the background. Closer this time. Then she whispered, not like that. The line clicked once as if the phone had shifted against fabric. What does that mean? I said quickly. She did not answer me directly. Instead, she said in a voice that had gone suddenly practiced and ordinary. I should go. Ben needs help with math. Mara. Good night, Tom. The call ended. I stood in the kitchen with the phone still at my ear, listening to the empty line and knowing with a clarity I had not allowed myself before that I was no longer dealing with a family strain or a child's misinterpretation or a son whose organizing nature needed softer edges. I was dealing with a system of language. Says, calmer, smooth, fine. Just one of those evenings. Taking a breath. Needed a minute. And because it was family language, because it ran through meals and corrections and apologies, and who passed the dishes when it had lived under my nose inside the ritual, I thought I knew best. I did not want Sunday to come. I wanted it desperately. That is how these things begin to own you, dread and need braided together so tightly you cannot say which one is pulling. Saturday passed in a fog of motion. I mowed the strip by the porch. I changed the water in the vase by Lorraine's photograph. I bought chicken and potatoes, beans, and stood for too long in the baking aisle staring at buttermilk biscuits in a tube as if the wrong convenience could decide the moral shape of my life. When I came home, I found myself wiping the mudroom bench and then disgusted with my own symbolism, wiping it again. The house had changed by then in ways I could not have explained to an outsider without sounding dramatic. It was still my house. Same hall runner, same brass umbrella stand, same paint bubbles over the upstairs bath from a leak Mike promised to fix in November. But each room now seemed to contain not only memory, but instruction. The dining room was no longer simply where Lorraine's dinners had happened. It was where Daniel had learned exactly how to imitate a humane order while removing its mercy. The kitchen was no longer only labor and warmth. It was a control point. The mudroom was no longer overflow. It was a corridor of absence. On Sunday morning, I woke before dawn and lay still staring at the pale square of window beside the bed until it turned from black to slate to weak gray. The house creaked. Somewhere a bird tried out spring in 2 uncertain notes and thought better of it. I went downstairs and made coffee. I took out the gravy boat. For a long time I only held it. The dent at the base lay under my thumb like a pulse. Under Lorraine, it had meant family use inherited imperfection, the kind of damage that proves a thing belonged to living people instead of catalogs. Under Daniel, it had become something else, a marker of sequence, a silent test, a warning that the meal had started without the woman who should have been seated before it moved. Objects do not change. Meanings do. That is one of the cruelest things about surviving someone. You keep their things, and then life continues making new demands of them. I polished the silver anyway. At 10:30, the phone rang. The caller ID said, "Daniel." My whole body went alert in a way that made me ashamed of itself. "Morning," he said when I answered. "Just checking timing. We may be 10 minutes late." "Mara's moving a little slow today." I closed my eyes. "Moving slow, how?" He laughed lightly. "You know, Sunday slow." "No," I said. "I don't know." There was a beat. "She didn't sleep well." "Is she all right?" "She's fine." Behind him, faint but clear, I heard the beep of a digital timer. A child's voice in the distance, Ellie. I thought, though, I could not make out the words. Then Daniel said, "Dad." "Yes." "You still there?" I looked down at the gravy boat in my hand. "Yes," I said. "We'll see you at 4:40. Don't stress." After he hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the deadline in my ear and understood something I had somehow still been resisting. If this were real, someone would have spoken sooner and more clearly. That had been my refuge, my last respectable lie. If there were actual danger here, surely Mara would say it. Surely Ellie would say more. Surely Mike would have come to me months ago. Surely some bruise, some broken dish, some unmistakable scene would have forced the thing into the open in language fit for decent people to act on. But families do not always produce truth in clean sentences. Sometimes they produce systems, corrections, codes, rooms you count. Children who learn not what is happening, but when to watch for it. That was what collapsed in me then, standing alone with Lorraine's silver in my hand, while my son casually informed me his wife was moving a little slow. Not my love for Daniel. That would have been simpler. What collapsed was the belief that silence and vagueness were evidence against danger. At 1:15, my phone rang again. It was Dr. Ruiz's office. The receptionist said, "Mr. Mercer, Dr. Ruiz asked me to let you know that if you have concerns today specifically, she would strongly encourage you to trust the pattern you have already observed." My mouth went dry. Did she say why she wanted that relayed? A pause. Then the receptionist, reading from something written down, said, her wording was, "Ellie did not describe an upsetting event. She described a household rule." The line went quiet. I thanked her somehow. I do not remember how. Then I stood in my kitchen with the phone in one hand and Lorraine's gravy boat in the other. And for the first time in my life, I understood that my son had not preserved my wife's Sunday table. He had learned exactly how to use it. For the rest of that afternoon, I moved through my house the way a man moves through a church after hearing that somebody has been stealing from the poor. Nothing had changed that could be photographed. The windows were where they had been. The sideboard still carried the same faint water ring from Easter of 2009 when Mike set down a sweating pitcher and Lorraine said with no real heat that a man who passed the bar ought to know what wood was for. The brass chandelier still needed one bulb replaced. The rug under the dining table still dipped slightly at the south corner where the floor had settled sometime during Clinton's second term and never apologized for it. Every object remained itself, but the meanings had shifted so violently that the house no longer gave me shelter. It gave me instruction. I stood at the dining room doorway with the gravy boat in my hand and looked at the places where everybody always sat. My own chair at the head. Mike along the side where he could stretch his legs and complain about the draft. Ben nearest the kitchen because he ate quickly and wanted escape routes. Ellie nearest the mudroom side, not because anyone assigned it that way, but because children drift toward the position that lets them keep watch over what the adults insist is ordinary. Mara often half-seated, half-risen near the buffet side where she could be called back into service without anyone having to name it. Daniel, wherever he could reach the most dishes with the fewest movements and still face the room. I set the gravy boat down on the sideboard and realized with a physical certainty that Lorraine had spent years arranging her table as a defense system. That was what I had missed. Not etiquette, not style, not female fussiness around serving order, as I had privately thought in some of my dumber younger years. Defense. She sat the cook before the food moved because labor disappears fastest when it belongs to a woman who wants to be easy to love. She put older guests away from the draft because she believed discomfort grows louder when people feel too polite to mention it. She kept children nearest help because shame travels quickly when it must cross a room. She would not let dishes leave the kitchen till everyone's place was real because once a meal begins without you, the room has already decided what you are worth. And I had taken all that for grace. I had loved her all those years and still thought half her moral intelligence was housekeeping. I went to the kitchen, sat down at the table and wrote 4 names on a legal pad. Daniel, Mara, Ellie, Mike. Then after a moment I added Janice. I did not know yet exactly what I was doing. I only knew that the old method hoping truth would voluntarily assemble itself into one undeniable clean shape had become another way of helping my son. Daniel thrived in vagueness as long as he got to define it. He turned atmosphere into doubt, and doubt into time, and time into a structure everybody else had to live inside. I had been giving him time. That ended there. The first person I called was Mike. He answered on the second ring. What? Come over. What happened? Come over, Michael. My use of his full name bought me silence. Then 20 minutes. It took him 14. He came in through the side door with his coat unbuttoned and his hair damp from the rain, carrying no briefcase, which meant he had not even bothered pretending this was casual. He found me in the kitchen with a legal pad in front of me and the gravy boat beside it. That bad, he said. Worse. He sat down without invitation. Tell me. So I told him about the call from Dr. Ruiz's office, word for word, as near as I could get it. Ellie did not describe an upsetting event. She described a household rule. When I was finished, Mike leaned back and looked at the ceiling the way he did in court, when a witness had just confirmed the thing he least wanted confirmed. Okay, he said. I hated that word from him. Too flat. Too ready. No, I said. Not okay. No, he said. I know. I mean, okay as in, now we stop treating this like a family feeling and start treating it like a pattern. He rubbed his jaw and looked toward the mudroom door. Have you talked to Mara since she called Friday? She said he says the garage is calmer. Mike's face changed. Not shock, a hardening. He says, yes. And what did she say? She said, not like that. He nodded once, slow. That's enough for me. It may not be enough for anybody else. It's enough for me to know where to look next. That was one of Mike's gifts and one of the reasons Daniel had always disliked him. Daniel preferred rooms where the truth arrived prettied up and grateful for the invitation. Mike had no patience for that version of honesty. If something smelled wrong, he bent toward it instead of away. We need proof that survives Daniel talking, I said. Mike studied me for a second. You've crossed over. To what? To the part where you know this is real and are scared of how real. I've been scared. No, he said quietly. You've been heartsick. Different animal. It irritated me that he was right. He got up and walked into the mudroom. I followed. The room had the same harmless look it always did in daylight, pale green walls, bench under the window cubbies, hooks. Umbrella stand the old runner. Mike crouched by the interior garage door. turned the latch, opened it, shut it again, then opened it once more and looked at the strike plate. What, I said. Nothing yet. He straightened. I want to see theirs. You can't just walk into their garage. He looked at me over his shoulder. No. But there are ways to stand in places people already expect you to stand. The rain had stopped, but left everything wet and raw looking. Through the mudroom window, the side yard shone dark as a seal's back. Mike stood with one hand on the knob and said, Do you know what bothers me most? I thought I knew, but I waited. He learned this in your house, Mike said. Not the locking part, maybe. The sequence part. The performance of competence. He learned exactly where people stop asking questions if the casserole lands on time. The cruelty of that was not only that it was true, it was that it implicated me too without letting me hide inside innocence. Lorraine had known. Not everything, maybe. Not the future in full, but enough. Enough to leave herself notes. Enough to say his standards were for people. Enough to make little adjustments that I had treated as a woman's instinct for smoothness instead of what they were correction. Containment. Opposition. I should have listened to her, I said. Mike did not soften it for me. Yeah. We spent the next hour at my kitchen table making a list that felt obscene simply because families are not supposed to require this kind of inventory. What do we know? Ellie's whisper. Ellie's drawing, Ellie flinching at timer sounds. Dr. Ruiz confirming pattern language. Daniel's prep pad, Janice's sighting. Mara's not like that. My own observations from Sunday. Mike's old memory of the side yard and blanket. What do we need? Something physical, something from the garage itself. Something that showed the lockout was not random or theatrical or a one-time marital scene reinterpreted by worried minds. Something that tied the room to the pattern. What about the doctor, Mike said. Not the therapist. Mara's. Can we get that? Not without consent. Not directly. I hated every sentence that began with not. Then, what can we do? Directly. Mike drummed his fingers once on the table. We can stop waiting for perfect certainty. We can put people in the same room in a way Daniel doesn't control. That's confrontation. That's eventually confrontation, he said. Before that, we need to know what we're walking into. Walking into where? He looked toward the window over the sink beyond it to nothing I could see. His house. The answer arrived the next morning in the form of Janice Holloway in a Pyrex dish. She appeared at my side porch a little after 10, carrying baked oatmeal and wearing lipstick too bright for Monday, which meant she had either a doctor's appointment or nerves. I invited her in before she had to ask, and she set the dish down and looked at the legal pad, Mike's handwriting my face and the general weather of the kitchen in one quick survey. You boys look like Methodists planning a coup, she said. Would you like coffee? I asked. Yes. Mike, who had stayed the night in the guest room, because once he commits to a problem, he prefers proximity to comfort, poured her a cup without asking how she took it. Janice accepted this as her due from the world. We sat. Tom, she said, I thought about what you asked me, and I looked back through my messages. She slid her phone across the table. There it was. October 17th, 6:42 p.m. Saw you in the garage. You okay, honey? Need anything? Mara had answered at 6:49. Thank you. Just one of those evenings. We're all okay. Janice tapped the screen with one red-painted nail. Read the punctuation. I looked at her. I'm serious, she said. Mara always uses too many exclamation points when she means to sound cheerful. Everybody has a tell. Mike leaned in. No exclamation point. Exactly. I would not have thought to notice that. Janice would. Women who survive neighborhoods and church committees develop whole, secondary literacy systems. Men tend to mistake for fuss. What else? I said. Janice took a breath. There was another time. Not the same exactly. Last month, maybe. I was taking in my trash cans and heard Daniel in the side driveway. Very calm voice. That was the thing. Calm as a weather report. I couldn't hear Mara at first. Then I heard her say, "Not in front of them." He said, "Then stop making me fix things in front of them." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Did you see them?" "Only part of them." He was standing by the side garage door. She was beyond him inside the shadow of the open garage. I could see one arm. He looked up, saw me, and smiled like we were all discussing landscaping. That was Daniel, calm enough to force everyone else into the position of seeming unreasonable. "What did you do?" Mike asked. Janice gave him a look. The same pathetic thing everyone always does the first few times. Something makes their insides go cold. I jiggled my trash can and pretended to be deeply interested in municipal service. No one spoke for a moment. Then Janice turned to me. "What are you going to do, Tom?" The question landed harder coming from her than from Mike because Janice had no blood in this. No old rivalries, no accumulated son-father disappointments. She was the outside witness asking whether I intended to remain the in-eyed excuse. "I'm going to see that garage," I said. Janice nodded once, as if this were the first sensible sentence anyone had produced all weekend. The opportunity came Tuesday evening. Daniel called around 4:30 to ask whether I could watch Ben for an hour after school on Wednesday because Mara had a dentist appointment and he might run late from work. Ordinarily, I would have said yes before he finished the question. This time I listened to his tone first. Light, efficient, confident that logistics move through him like water through built channels. "I can do that," I said. "Perfect. I'll swing by and get him after 6. What about Ellie? She has therapy." Of course she did. The family system even contained its own appointments. "Bring him by," I said, "or I can come there." There was a tiny pause. "No need," he said. "I'll drop him." I made my own voice easy. I was going to be on that side of town anyway. I could save you the drive. Another pause, smaller this time, because he was too controlled to let them grow obvious. "Sure," he said finally, "if that's easier." After he hung up, Mike said, "He didn't like that." "No." "Good." I slept badly again, but differently. Not helplessly. Strategically bad sleep has its own texture. You wake with lists, routes, timings, risks. By morning, I knew exactly what I meant to do and exactly how little I liked that the task had fallen to me. I baked banana bread because no one distrusts a grandfather who arrives carrying bread. I put it in Lorraine's old blue-glazed loaf dish with the hairline crack on one side. The crack had survived 22 years and half a dozen moves, and it comforted me to carry something honest into a house increasingly arranged around concealment. The split-level Daniel and Mara, bought 7 years earlier, sits on a curved street in Worthington lined with sycamores and mailboxes that all appear to have been approved by the same committee. Good lawns, basketball hoops, new mulch in every season. I had been there 100 times and thought I knew every room. Wednesday was the first time the place greeted me as if it might not know me back. Mara answered the door. She looked startled enough by the sight of me that for one naked instant I saw what lay under all her practiced management of expression. Not annoyance, not simple nerves, fear of disruption. "Tom." I was nearby, I said, lifting the loaf dish a little. "Brought banana bread. Thought I'd save Daniel the extra trip and take Ben with me from here if that still works." Behind her, I could hear a television low somewhere upstairs and the hollowing bounce of a child moving room to room. "That's fine," she said too quickly. "Of course." She stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold with the absurd sense that I was walking not into my son's house, but into a demonstration of it. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and whatever candle people buy when they want visitors to think peace smells like vanilla. The family room beyond had all the elements of ordinary life arranged almost too legibly folded throw blankets, children's shoes aligned by size 1 Lego, under the coffee table as if to certify authenticity. Yet nothing in the space seemed used so much as reset. Mara, I said, keeping my voice low, is now a bad time. Her eyes flicked toward the hall that led to the kitchen and garage. It's just a day. That sentence came out so weary I nearly dropped the loaf. Ben came thundering down the stairs in socks, hugging a soccer ball to his chest. Grandpa. I bent and hugged him. Warm child shampoo, stale crackers, the whole uncomplicated grace of boyhood. He asked if we could stop for fries, and I said, probably not, and he acted as though I had struck him. Mara smiled at that exchange, and for a brief moment it was her own smile. Then, just as quickly, I saw it vanish behind whatever inner accounting governed her days. "Can I get you coffee?" she asked. "That'd be nice." This was the opening I had come for, though wanting a thing does not make it easy to use. She led me into the kitchen. It was larger than mine, brighter, newer, with quartz counters and an island big enough to host a small election. But for all its space, it lacked the kind of intelligence Lorraine had built into tighter rooms. Everything here was efficiency without mercy, a place designed to move tasks along, not absorb human weather. On the counter by the stove sat a black digital timer. My skin prickled. Mara saw me looking at it and reached for the coffee tin too fast, knocking a spoon sideways. The clatter sounded too loud in the room. "Sorry," she said. "No need." She got the coffee going. I stood by the island and let my eyes travel where they could without becoming accusatory. School forms stacked under a paperweight, an opened package of sandwich bags, a child's water bottle, a yellow legal pad by the refrigerator, not his Sunday pad. Another one. I could not read the writing from where I stood. That irritated me. "Ben tells me soccer club is serious business now," I said. "It is, to Ben." "You all right, Mara?" The coffee maker hissed. She did not turn around. "Yes, I need a better word than yes." That made her stop. Not turn-only stop. Her shoulders rose and settled once. "He likes things orderly," she said. "Orderly is not the same as locked." She turned then. I have tried many times since to describe the expression on her face in that moment. It was not gratitude that I had said the word. It was not relief. It was the more complicated pain of somebody hearing the thing named and knowing naming it may make life more dangerous before it makes it safer. "Ben's upstairs," she said quietly. "Not here." I took a step closer. "Then tell me the truth." She looked toward the hall again. The side of her jaw tightened. "He doesn't hit me," she said, as if offering me a bargain. The sentence made me furious in an old helpless way. Furious at Daniel, at myself, at the world that trains women to offer the absence of one kind of violence as reassurance about another. I didn't ask that. He says the garage keeps things from escalating. To what? To a scene. There it was. The house speaking again in its own corrupted vocabulary. What does escalating mean to him? A sound from upstairs, Ben shouting at the television. Mara closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she said still low, "It means if I contradict him when the children are there. Or if I'm too slow and he thinks they're seeing disorder. Or if I keep talking after he says we'll discuss it later." The coffee maker clicked off. And then, she stared at the counter. "Then he says I need a reset." The word went through me so hard I had to put a hand on the island. "Reset," I said. "Yes." The yellow pad by the refrigerator swam briefly in my vision. "He writes it down." She looked up sharply. "What?" "He writes it down." Her face changed. Not because this was news, I thought, but because it meant Daniel's private vocabulary had escaped the house. "He has lists for everything," she said. "And the garage." She swallowed. "He says it's temporary." "How does it work?" "He sends me out." "Does he lock the door?" She did not answer right away. "Mara." "Yes." I felt then, all at once, a violent old man's urge to go directly to the garage, rip the door off its hinges, drive to wherever Daniel was, and discover whether calm men could bleed as messily as loud ones. Age does not improve you so much as teach you what cannot be afforded. How long? She shook her head. It depends. On what? How difficult he thinks I'm being. I had never hated my son before that minute. Been disappointed in him, yes. Embarrassed by him. Angry with him. Exhausted by him. But hatred is a cleaner and more terrifying thing. It strips your excuses before it strips your affection, and then leaves the affection behind to rot separately. The garage door opener. Motor sounded suddenly from the next room. Mara's whole body changed. Not dramatically, efficiently, fear with practice. He's home early, she said. I turned toward the hall. No, she said so fast it was almost a hiss. Take Ben and go. I want to see that room. Her voice dropped lower still. Not today. Footsteps. Male measured coming through the mudroom. Daniel entered the kitchen carrying his laptop bag and a grocery sack. He took in the scene in one sweep, me by the island, Mara by the coffee maker, Ben upstairs, my loaf dish on the counter. He smiled. Dad, thought you were taking Ben from your place. I was nearby. Convenient. He set the grocery sack down and kissed Mara lightly on the temple, a gesture so practiced I could have applauded the choreography if I had not wanted to break his wrist. What's in the bag, I asked, because one keeps talking until one understands the floor. Sparkling water. Strawberries. Ellie likes the expensive kind when she has hard days. He reached for the loaf dish. Banana bread. Just something I had. Thoughtful. Nothing in his tone could be arrested. Ben came barreling down the stairs. Daddy Grandpa says no fries. Daniel laughed and said, That sounds like Grandpa. His hand went to the timer without looking. Not because it was beeping, because that was where his hand rested in this room. Near control. I watched him touch the plastic edge with one finger and knew that if I stayed another 2 minutes, I would either show too much or not enough. Both would serve him. Come on, Ben, I said. Get your shoes. Ben groaned theatrically and went. Daniel looked at Mara. You all set? Yes, she said. He nodded, satisfied, as if she had reported on the weather correctly. At the door, while Ben was still fighting his sneaker and Mara had disappeared upstairs for Ellie's therapy folder, Daniel said in a voice only I could hear. You look tired, Dad. I looked back at him. I am. You don't have to keep doing Sundays if it's becoming too much. We can always host. There it was. The deeper betrayal. Not just the corrections, the lockouts, the humiliations built into meal flow. Not just the seizure of one woman's visibility. The larger theft beneath it. He wanted the ritual itself. Wanted my age and grief and dependence to ripen into surrender so fully that the family center would pass to him without resistance. He had not only occupied Lorraine's table, he had been preparing to inherit it. I smiled at him then because anything else would have shown blood. That won't be necessary, I said. His own smile held, calm, attentive, almost filial. Whatever you need, he said. Ben finally got his shoe on and we left. I did not speak to the boy on the drive except to ask whether he wanted to stop for a milkshake, which he did, and whether school had been boring, which it had. His answers came in child-shaped chunks, whole and ordinary, and I listened with a tenderness so sharp it hurt. Children do not know the shape of the systems they live inside. They know only where the weather changes. When I brought him back an hour later, I did not go in. I watched from the car as Daniel opened the front door before Ben reached it, as if he had been watching for us. Mike was waiting at my house when I got back. One look at my face and he said, What? So I told him. Not every word. The essential ones. Reset. He says the garage keeps things from escalating. If I contradict him when the children are there. You don't have to keep doing Sundays. We can always host. Mike did not interrupt once. When I finished, he stood up, walked to the sink and ran cold water over both hands for several seconds. Then he shut it off and leaned there looking out the dark window. He's building a transfer, he said. Yes. From you to him. Yes. And the garage is part punishment, part training. The room seemed to steady around that because it was true enough to hold weight. Training for who, I asked, though I knew. Everybody. That night we did what I should have done sooner and what I hated doing at all. We planned. Not violence, not tricks, not amateur theatrics with hidden cameras and gotcha lines. Daniel would have loved that because men like him are strongest when they can reclassify moral challenge as emotional disorder. No, we planned sequence, witness, position, the same way he did, only for a different purpose. Janice, if needed, would come for dessert next Sunday. Not before. If she arrived too early, he would adjust. Mike would be there from the start. I would cook, not delegate. Mara would be invited to sit explicitly before serving. The gravy boat would not leave my hand or the sideboard until she did. If Daniel interrupted that order, I would stop the meal. If he tried to narrate Mara's state, I would ask her directly in front of everyone whether she wished to sit. If he refused, the refusal would belong to him in the open, not the garage, the room. Mike listened to this and nodded slowly. That's the first smart thing grief has let you do in 2 years. That's insulting. Yep. It was also true. Thursday and Friday passed in that strange, sharpened state where every ordinary action acquires tactical edges. I bought groceries. I called Janice and asked whether she could stop by next Sunday after dinner for coffee, and she understood the quotation marks without asking me to explain them. I polished the silver. I found myself checking the mudroom latch in my own house 3 times a day, though nothing depended on it. At one point I stood in the garage with a folding chair in front of me and had to leave because the sight of it filled me with such naked, helpless rage I could not trust the air around my own body. On Saturday afternoon, Mike came over with copies of the legal language around temporary protective orders and child welfare reporting, not because we were filing anything yet, but because he wanted me to stop pretending family love exempted us from real-world consequence. If this breaks tomorrow, he said it breaks into more than speeches. I know. No, he said. You know in the widower sense. I need you to know in the practical sense. Once you take back the room from him, you don't get to hand it back because everybody cries. I know, I said again. This time he let it pass. That evening after he left, I went down to the pantry alcove and found myself sorting recipe cards by category, just to keep my hands from shaking. I came across one I had not seen in months. Pot roast for company. On the back in Lorraine's hand. Don't let Daniel seat himself at the head if Tom is carrying plates. He mistakes vacancy for permission. I sat on the little stool again and laughed once out of pure grief. She had known him all along, not as a monster. That would make the story too simple and the loss less painful. She had known him as mothers sometimes know sons who resemble the worst unexamined part of their fathers and the hardest defended part of themselves. She had known exactly where he leaned and spent years subtly leaning back. And after she died, I had stopped leaning. Sunday came cold and bright. I woke before the alarm and dressed in the dark. Downstairs, I set coffee to brew, took the chicken from the refrigerator and laid out the vegetables in the old enamel bowl. Every movement felt doubled, one layer practical, one anticipatory. I could feel the house around me as a field of lines about to be tested. At noon, Janice texted, "Still on. Coffee only unless you need a pie." I wrote back, "Coffee only." At 1:30, Mike arrived with no sarcasm at all, which was more unnerving than usual. He kissed my cheek, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Tell me what you need done. You can mash potatoes. Look at us," he said, "a family." But even he could not make the line stick. By 4 o'clock, the chicken was roasting, the potatoes were peeled, the beans snapped the rolls, warming low in the oven. The gravy sat in its pot on the back burner, not yet in the silver boat. I had made one decision with absolute clarity: Daniel would not touch it first again. The old house had never felt so aware of itself. The dining room looked beautiful in a way that almost angered me. West light on the table, blue-rimmed plates, napkins folded exactly as Lorraine used to fold them, Not because I thought ritual would save us, but because I wanted the truth to meet the room in its full inheritance. The mudroom door stood closed at the edge of the kitchen like a fact we had all been teaching ourselves not to read. At 4:10, the phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. "We're on time," he said. "Miracle of miracles." "Good. Everything all right?" "Yes." A pause. "You sound formal." "I'm 72, Daniel." Formal is just how tired sounds. He laughed, but I could hear him listening behind the laugh. "We'll be there shortly." When he hung up, Mike said, "He senses something. Let him." At 4:28, I carried the gravy from the pot to the counter and poured it into Lorraine's silver boat. The warm smell rose around my hands. Pepper stock flour. Chicken fat memory. I rubbed my thumb over the dent once. Then I set the boat not by the pass-through where Daniel could reach it, but on the sideboard in the dining room behind my own chair. Mike noticed. "Good," he said. The front door opened at 4:36. Children first as always, because children are the visible proof people believe makes houses safe. Ben came in noisy. Ellie quieter. Mara behind them with a glass dish of lemon bars under a tea towel. Daniel last carrying sparkling water and smiling like a man arriving for an exam he expected to pass. The house held its breath. "Dad," he said brightly. "Daniel." It was the first time in my life I had ever greeted my son like an adversary, and not let my voice show it. Mara looked at the kitchen, the table me, then the sideboard. Her gaze caught on the gravy boat's new position and stayed there 1 second too long. Good, I thought. "See it." Daniel kissed my cheek, glanced past me toward the stove and said, "Need me on potatoes or carving?" "I've got it." He gave me that small, patient smile adult children sometimes give aging parents when preparing to help anyway. "All right, I'll handle Flo." "No," I said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just no. The room shifted. Ben did not notice. Ellie did. Mara did. Mike from the sink went still in the exact way a good witness goes still when the door to truth cracks open. Daniel's smile remained in place. "Sorry, I've got the flow," I said. For the first time, something unreadable crossed his face and did not clear immediately. Then he nodded. "Of course." He took the lemon bars from Mara and out of a habit started toward the mudroom. "Leave dessert in the dining room," I said. He stopped. "Dad," he said lightly, "we usually in the dining room." Mara looked at me, not with gratitude, with fear sharpened by hope, which is a much more dangerous look. Daniel turned, set the dessert down where I had indicated, and said, "Whatever you want." The children were washing hands. Mike was setting out water. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and starch and the hot metallic note of the radiator. Through the window, the side yard was going blue with evening. Everything that happened next was ordinary enough to be deniable to anybody who had not lived the last week inside its prelude. Daniel opened the warming drawer without asking. I shut it with my hip and moved the plates myself. He reached for the bread basket. I took it first. Mara drifted automatically toward the mudroom side of the kitchen as if her body still believed in old channels. I said, "Can you sit a minute, Mara?" Daniel answered before she could. "She's fine. She wants to get the beans." "Mara," I said again, looking only at her. "Sit a minute." Her hands tightened on the dish towel she was holding. She did not move. Daniel's voice came smooth as cream left out too long. "Dad, we don't need to make this complicated." "Complicated." Mike turned from the sink and leaned one shoulder against the counter, watching. Ellie had come into the dining room without anyone noticing and was standing at the threshold between rooms, eyes fixed on the sideboard where the silver boat waited behind my chair. I could feel the exact moment the house tipped from ritual to reckoning. "Mara," I said. And this time I put all the plain authority I had ever used in a classroom, a marriage, a family, into the word. "Sit down." She looked at Daniel. That was the point of no return revelation. Not the garage, not the lock, not the chair or blanket or timer. That look. The reflexive, frightened, immediate turn of a grown woman's face toward her husband to see whether she was permitted to take a chair at my table. Nothing in my life as a father had prepared me for the hatred that gave me. Daniel saw me see it. His expression did not shatter. That would have been easier. It cooled. He set down the sparkling water with great care and said very calmly, "I think we should all take a breath." And then, from the mudroom beyond him, there came the soft, metallic click of the interior latch turning. The next Sunday, I knew would not belong to my son. The sound of that latch turning was small enough that Ben did not notice it at all. He was in the dining room, already climbing into his chair with the heedless hunger of a 7-year-old who believes dinner is the central crisis of the world. Ellie heard it. Mara heard it. Mike heard it. And Daniel, standing in the kitchen with his hand still near the sparkling water and his face gone cool and careful, heard that we heard it. No one moved for one stretched second. Then I said very quietly, "Nobody touch that door." Daniel gave a brief, almost incredulous laugh. "Dad, nobody," I said again. I had spent 18 months thinking grief had made me smaller, softer maybe, easier to move around. But there are forms of age that are not declined so much as stripping. You lose appetite for performance. You lose patience for the polite lie that everyone in a room must participate in just because the most dangerous person there knows how to keep his voice down. What remained in me at that moment was not force in the young man's sense. It was something harder to resist. Plain refusal. Mara was still standing by the edge of the dining room dish towel, twisted in both hands. She had not sat. Daniel's eyes were on me now, not her. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," he said. "This is not a game." "Then what is it?" "It's dinner," I said, "and for once it's going to begin the way it should have begun every time." His face altered, not by much. Only enough for someone who loved him once in a simpler way to feel the loss of that simplicity clean through the chest. "Dad," he said, still calm, "you're upsetting the kids." There it was, exactly where he always went. Not to truth. To management. To the nearest available explanation that turned his control into concern for someone more vulnerable. He had always been good at locating innocence as a shield while he hid behind it. I looked past him to Ellie. She was standing with one hand on the back of her chair. Eyes fixed not on me or her father, but on Mara. Waiting to learn what happened when an adult was told to sit. That child's face settled it for me. "Mara," I said. And this time I walked into the dining room, pulled out the chair nearest the buffet, and held it with one hand. "Sit down." Daniel moved then one quick half-step, not enough to constitute violence, not enough for anyone outside the family to name as threat, exactly enough to announce that the room still belonged to him if he said it did. "Dad," he said, sharper now. "Stop." I turned to him. It was the first time in his adult life I had looked at my son without protecting him from my own understanding. "No," I said. The word did not rise. It settled. Mike came away from the sink and leaned against the kitchen threshold, not blocking, not intervening yet, only taking up the kind of ground men like Daniel hate, witness ground. Janice Holloway chose that moment to knock at the side door. No one answered it. The knock came again, more tentative. "Mike," I said, eyes still on Daniel, "let Janice in." Daniel's head turned toward the mudroom, then toward the side porch. He understood then, or enough of it to recognize shape if not extent. His gaze came back to me with something colder than anger in it. "You invited the neighbor," he said. "I invited a witness." Mara made a small sound at that. Not quite a gasp. More like the involuntary sound a body makes when hope arrives wearing the same shoes as danger. Mike let Janice in. The side porch door opened. Cold air came with her, along with the smell of damp leaves and coffee from the thermos she was carrying, because Janice never arrived anywhere emotionally difficult without refreshments, as if the body must be given some domestic instruction while the soul caught up. She stepped into the kitchen, took in the room in one sweep, and very gently set the thermos on the counter. "Oh," she said. Daniel smiled at her. Actually smiled. "Janice. Didn't know we were entertaining." Janice was not a woman easily flattered into confusion. She smoothed the front of her blouse once and said, "Seems like everybody's learning something." The children looked from face to face, now feeling the pressure without fully understanding its terms. Ben opened his mouth to ask a question. Mike crossed into the dining room and said, "Hey, buddy, why don't you and Ellie go wash your hands again for me? Real thorough this time." "Surgeon level." Ben protested. Ellie did not. She took her brother's sleeve and led him out toward the downstairs powder room. Daniel watched them go. "Don't involve them in this," he said. "I'm trying not to," I said. "You should have thought of that sooner." He gave me a look I had never seen from him. Not outrage, not shame. Pure, private contempt so briefly visible it would have escaped anyone not searching for it. Then it was gone again, and the calm had returned. "Mara," he said with the soft professional patience of a man explaining a misunderstanding to an unstable audience, "sit down if you want to sit down. No one's stopping you." That sentence would have worked once, maybe even last week. It was exquisitely designed to recast the whole room to make her fear look voluntary and my intervention look melodramatic. But something had shifted too far already. I did not look at him. I looked at Mara. "Do you want to sit down?" I asked. The room waited on her breath. Her eyes went to the chair I was holding, then to the mudroom door, then to Daniel, because some reflexes survive truth longer than they should. Finally back to me. "Yes," she said. The word barely carried. I pulled the chair out farther. She sat. That was the first thing that broke. Not Daniel's face, not the family myth entire, only sequence. But sequence was what he had built himself on. Mara seated before service. Mara visible. Mara choosing a chair at a table she had always been required to orbit. The room changed around that simple act the way a church changes when somebody stops whispering and speaks the prayer aloud. I went to the sideboard, picked up Lorraine's silver gravy boat, and carried it back to the table. I did not set it down immediately. I kept my hand on the handle. "Now," I said, "we can begin." Daniel laughed once thinly. "Begin what?" "The truth." He shook his head and walked to the kitchen counter where the black timer sat. I saw his hand drift toward it without thought, the way another man's hand might go to his wedding ring in an anxious moment. He tapped the plastic casing once with his index finger. Mike saw it too. "Don't," Mike said. Daniel's hand stilled. Janice had moved no farther than the threshold. She stood with both hands wrapped around her own elbows, looking like a woman at a funeral, waiting to see whether the family would permit the right name to be spoken. Mara sat very straight in the chair, both hands under the table as if she feared even her fingers might betray her. I could see the pulse in her throat. My son stood in my kitchen in the space where his mother once taught him how to carry hot dishes without scolding himself, and looked at me as though I had finally become inconvenient enough to be regrettable. "You've lost perspective," he said. "No," I said. "I found it." His jaw tightened. "Over what?" A child whispering something she doesn't understand. A tired woman having a hard week. Mike filling your head with his usual resentments. Mike made a short sound through his nose. "There he is." Daniel ignored him. "You've turned dinner into a scene." I set the gravy boat down in the middle of the table with care. The silver caught the late light from the west window and held it in its dent. "You turned dinner into a system," I said. The room went still. His eyes flickered once toward the children's bathroom, judging distance, timing return. He was always calculating flow. Even now. What system, he said, very level. The one where Mara doesn't get to sit if you decide she's thrown things off. The one where the garage becomes a place you send her when the children are watching. The one where my granddaughter has learned to count her mother by room. For the first time all evening, Daniel's composure did not merely cool. It faltered. Not because he felt guilty, because he was revising. I saw it happen. Which version of denial, which hierarchy of minimization, which tone of husbandly burden and fatherly concern would best survive the evidence he could not yet know I had gathered? He was not a raving man. That would have been easier to fight. He was an editing man. Mara's chair made the smallest sound against the floorboards. Daniel looked at her. You told him that? She did not answer. Mara. I reached across the table and put my hand over the handle of the gravy boat again before he could step nearer. Talk to me, I said. Not her. His eyes came back to mine. This is between me and my wife. No, I said. Not anymore. Not once the children learn the rule. Janice closed her eyes for a second at that. Mike folded his arms. Daniel spread both hands slightly, the picture of exasperated patience. Okay, fine. Since we're apparently doing theater, yes, there have been times when Mara needed space. The word dropped in the room like something rotted. Needed, Mike said. Interesting choice. She gets overwhelmed, Daniel said. The kids get loud. Things pile up. She spirals. Mara looked at the tablecloth. And the answer, I said, is to lock her in the garage. I do not lock my wife in the garage. His voice remained calm, but the edges had sharpened. There was a contempt in him now he could no longer quite sand down. What do you call it, I asked, when she says you do? He smiled then, but it was no longer for the room. It was for himself, a private smile of disgust that did not reach his eyes. I call it a woman saying things in a tone designed to make older men feel protective. Janice inhaled audibly. There it was. Not the whole mask gone, but enough of the face beneath it to frighten anybody who had once mistaken him for merely organized. Mara lifted her head. I didn't say it in a tone, she said. Her voice was steadier than mine had been at her age. Daniel turned to her with the kind of soft astonishment abusers reserve for the moment their private reality declines public cooperation. Mara. No. The word came from her more firmly now. No, Daniel. I do not know if she had ever said his name that way before. He looked as if the sound itself offended him. I said, tell it plain. She swallowed. Once. Then she did. The first sentences came haltingly, not because she lacked language, but because she had spent too long being interrupted out of it. He would send her out when she contradicted him in front of the children, or if dinner ran late and he said she was making the room anxious, or if she tried to stop him from correcting Ellie too sharply at the table, or if she kept talking after he said later. He would say she needed to reset. He would take her phone if he thought she was too worked up. He would shut the interior door. Sometimes he locked it. Sometimes he stood on the mudroom side and said she could come in when she was calm enough not to poison the room. At that sentence, Ben came back from the bathroom. He stopped in the doorway, wet hands, confined face. Ellie came in behind him and froze. I had hoped to keep them out of the worst of it. Life had made other plans. Mike moved at once. He crouched to their level and said, Hey, why don't you two go pick a movie upstairs for later? Ben said, Why's Mom crying? I had not even seen that Mara was. The tears were falling silently straight down her face as if her body had bypassed past permission. Ellie looked from Mara to me, and then to the gravy boat in the center of the table, untouched. She's sitting, Ellie said. Nobody answered. Mike put a hand on each child's shoulder and steered them gently toward the stairs. This time even Ben went. Halfway up, Ellie turned back, once not toward her father, but toward her mother, and then vanished around the bend. The room that remained after children leave a crisis is not merely quieter. It is morally different. Daniel looked up toward the stairs until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he turned back to Mara, and whatever had still resembled social skin in him thinned dangerously. "This," he said softly, "is what happens when you refuse to keep things private." Mike took one step forward. "Be careful." Daniel did not even look at him. "I am being careful. More careful than anyone else in this family has ever been." I heard the word family, and understood then that his grievance ran wider than his marriage. This was not only about Mara. It was about inheritance of authority, about being the son who had waited near the center long enough to believe the center belonged to him by temperament, if not by right. I said, "You wrote it down." His head turned. "What?" I took the folded copy from my shirt pocket and laid it on the table beside the gravy boat. "Sunday. Dad's. M. Beans. M. Reset." For the first time that evening, real surprise crossed his face, then immediately fury, not loud. Deep. "You went through my notes. I read what you left in my kitchen after using my wife's dinner table as a timing grid." He looked at the page. At Mara. At me. The room had finally ceased to be improv. He was now inside a structure he had not authored. "That proves nothing," he said. "No," I said. "Not by itself." Janice spoke then because good witnesses know when the truth needs another pair of shoes to stand in. "I saw her in the garage," she said. "October 17th. Blanket around her shoulders, Ellie beside the freezer." Daniel gave a disbelieving laugh. "You looked into my garage." I looked where a child was talking. He turned to me as if Janice's very presence were beneath his category system. "This is what you're doing. Building a case out of neighbors and therapists and an emotional child." Mike said, "Interesting phrasing again." Daniel ignored him. "Dad, you of all people should know children distort." "She drew the room," I said. "They draw monsters too. She drew the latch." That landed. He covered it quickly. "Because she's seen a door." "No," I said, "because she's learned what it means." He stepped toward the table, then both hands flat on the wood, and I saw in him suddenly the boy who used to set his jaw when he was losing a board game and insist the rules had been badly explained. The scale had changed. The posture had not. "What exactly do you think happened here?" he said, voice low. "That I built some kind of prison in a suburban garage because my wife is dramatic and my daughter is nervous and my brother's a professional malcontent." Mike smiled without warmth. "See, that's almost persuasive if we all developed language yesterday." Mara wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "Stop saying I'm dramatic." Daniel turned on her with terrifying quiet. "Then stop behaving like every feeling you have deserves architecture." There it was. Not volume, not rage. Contempt stripped of its Sunday clothes. Janice put one hand over her mouth. Mike's whole body went still in the way a dog goes still before deciding whether the person in front of it deserves teeth. I heard myself say, "Get away from the table." Daniel looked at me. "Excuse me, you heard me. This is my family." "No," I said. "It is also mine. And this house is certainly mine." He straightened slowly. Then he said the sentence that finished him for me. "You've always been sentimental about women who need managing." I do not know whether he heard himself fully. I do know the room heard him. Mara closed her eyes. Janice sat down abruptly as if her knees had gone unreliable. Mike let out one sharp breath that might have been a laugh if laughter could kill. And God help me, I saw Lorraine. Not as a ghost, not as some mystical visitation at the peak of drama. I saw her in memory so vividly that the present seemed to shift around it. Lorraine at 43 standing at the stove while Daniel, home from college and full of theories about efficiency, complained that Mara had made too many side dishes for Easter because there was no need to perform abundance. Lorraine had said without turning around, "Feeding people isn't performance." He had laughed and said, "Maybe not for women." She turned, then spoon in hand, and said with a steadiness that quieted all three men in the room, "Then God help the men who only know how to eat." I had admired her then. I had not understood the warning embedded in it. Now I did. I moved around the table and stood across from my son. "You don't get to use her table anymore," I said. He stared at me, and maybe because I had never spoken to him without cushioning the blow before he truly heard it. "You can't be serious. I have never been more serious. What are you going to do? Ban me from Sunday dinner?" "Yes." The word landed like a dropped dish. Mara's eyes opened. Janice looked up. Mike's face changed from battle-ready to something almost like grief. Daniel laughed once, but it came out wrong. "You're choosing her over me?" "No," I said. "I'm choosing truth over what you've made of this family." "You think she's innocent?" "I think innocence has nothing to do with whether you locked a woman in a garage because dinner displeased you. It wasn't because dinner displeased me." "Then say what it was because of." He did not answer. "Say it," I said. His mouth tightened. Because somebody had to contain the damage. There are moments when a room ceases to have sides. This was one. No one in that kitchen dining room was any longer deciding what Daniel meant. He had named himself. Mike took out his phone. "I'm calling this in." Daniel turned sharply. "You do that, and you blow this family apart over one ugly interpretation." Mike's thumb hovered over the screen. "No. Over a pattern." I held up one hand to stop him, not because I wanted mercy for Daniel, but because I wanted sequence clean, undeniable, not vulnerable to later distortion. The same weapon Daniel had used for years. I would use it now, for truth. "Mara," I said, "do you want to leave this house tonight?" The question shook her. Not because she didn't know the answer. Because wanting is different from planning. And women in systems like this are taught to distrust desire if it arrives before logistics. She looked toward the stairs. "Yes," she said. "Do you want the children with you?" "Yes." "Do you want Daniel touching your phone, your keys, your purse, or deciding where you go tonight?" "No." Mike hit the call button. Janice stood up. "I'll help pack bags." Daniel moved then in a way that would have looked to a stranger like nothing more than a man stepping into the middle of his own crisis. To us, it felt like the air narrowing. He came toward the stairs. Mike blocked him. "Move," Daniel said. "No, this is insane." Mike's voice stayed conversational. "You're not going upstairs." Daniel looked at me then, and in his face I saw the last intact fragment of the son I had once thought I knew. A boyish disbelief that authority might actually deny him. Then it calcified into something uglier. "You think this makes you noble," he said. "You think this is what Mom would have wanted." I stepped close enough that he had to hear me without performance. "No," I said. "I think your mother spent years trying to keep a man from becoming what you became, and I think I helped you by not understanding her in time. That landed harder than anything else. Because for the first time I think he heard me not as an old man having a moral episode, but as his father withdrawing the deepest thing a father can give a son after boyhood, the claim that he can still be recognized without shame." His face changed, truly changed. The calm did not return. The mask did not simply slip. It collapsed under the weight of being no longer useful. "What did you expect from me?" he said. And the contempt in him no longer bothered hiding. "To let every room in my life be run by everybody's moods. To stand there while she undermined me in front of the kids. To watch you drift around in this museum pretending Mom still lived here and then thank you for the privilege. Somebody had to make things function." Janice made a small wounded sound from the stairs. Mike said, "There he is again, but this time without irony." I said, "Function for who?" He looked right at me and answered, "For the people who could handle it." Mara, halfway up the stairs, by then stopped dead. That was the moment the last doubt left the room. Not because his words were dramatic. Because they were ordinary to him. Because he said them like accounting, like law, like gravity. The next part happened both quickly and with the strange slowness of real consequence. Mike finished the call with a steadiness that would have irritated me under lesser circumstances. Janice went upstairs to help Mara gather what mattered most, fast. I heard dresser drawers open closet doors, children's voices lifting in confusion and being calmed. Daniel made 2 more attempts to recast the entire thing as an overreaction. He called Dr. Ruiz, a woman who makes a living turning nerves into narratives. He referred to Janice as the neighborhood surveillance state in orthopedic shoes. He said Mara had always been unstable under pressure and that older people romanticized female fragility when it made them feel useful. Every sentence cost him something because every sentence showed us more clearly that this was not a husband who had lost his temper. This was a man who believed private suffering was the tax other people paid for his idea of order. By the time the first officer arrived, an older woman and a younger man who entered with the exhausted alertness of people who knew domestic calls could become theater if they weren't careful, the house had already given up its secret in the only way houses really can, through the people standing inside them no longer agreeing to lie. I told them everything plain. No embellishment, no rage. The whisper, the drawing, the therapy confirmation, the notes, the neighbor, the statement at the table. Mara's own words, the room, the sequence, the children. Mara came downstairs with Ellie's backpack, Ben's overnight bag, and a tote that looked as if it had been packed by a woman forced to decide in 10 minutes what counted as life. Her face was washed, not composed. The officer, Sergeant Linda Hargrove, according to the tag on her chest, spoke to her privately in the front parlor, while the younger officer stood near the foyer and watched Daniel with a stillness I appreciated. Daniel, to his credit, if credit is the word, did not rant. He was beyond that. He kept trying to reclaim narrative. He called it marital de-escalation. He called the garage a quiet space. He called the lock temporary. He called the children oversensitive. He called me grief-impaired without using the exact phrase. He was so calm he nearly made himself unreal until the sergeant asked one question that stripped all the upholstery off his language. If the space was voluntary, she said, why was the door locked from the kitchen side? He answered too fast, for safety. Whose? That he could not answer without collapsing into the truth of himself. The sergeant looked at him a long moment. Then she asked to see the garage. I went with them. So did Mike. So did Mara. After a pause so long, I thought she might refuse. Daniel said nothing. He had gone pale in a way that made him look suddenly like a much older man, not because he felt remorse, but because systems hate daylight. The mud room seemed smaller with uniformed people in it. Meaner. Its pale green walls, Lorraine's practical cubbies, the bench cushion she had sewn and re-sewn, all of it, now gathered around the interior garage door, as if years of domestic use had been waiting for this precise threshold to declare allegiance. Sergeant Hargrove turned the latch and opened the door. The garage smelled of cold concrete dust and faint old metal. There it was. The chair. The blanket folded and refolded on the shelf by the freezer. Bottled water, a tote with tissues and hand cream. The white freezer humming steadily in the corner like a machine too old to know what human beings had made it part of. Near the inside knob on the painted metal of the door, a spread of scuff marks at hand, height and lower, where repeated contact had worn the finish slightly duller than the rest. Not claw marks, not horror. Something worse, because it was so ordinary. The evidence of a person pushing and waiting, pushing again, standing, sitting, learning the room. Sergeant Hargrove crouched, touched the worn paint lightly, then looked at the latch mechanism. The younger officer took photographs. No one said much. The most memorable thing about that moment was the humming. The freezer. A domestic machine doing what it had always done, indifferent to the way human beings had bent its corner of the room into a place of punishment. I walked past them all and put my hand flat against the inside of the door. Cold metal, slight give. The exact place I thought where Mara must have pressed, and perhaps Ellie too, with her blanket and her watchful eyes. I kept my palm there and understood that grief had finished with me. Not grief itself, but grief as an alibi. Whatever I did next in life would have to be done in clear sight of what I had failed to see in time. When we came back inside, Mara and the children left with Janice to stay the night at her place until Mike could help arrange something more stable. The sergeant gave Mara next steps in a voice gentle enough that I nearly had to look away. Daniel was told with a firmness he did not know how to metabolize that he would not be following them and that any effort to do so would be handled very badly for him. He looked at me once as they were leaving, not pleading, not apologizing, measuring. I held his gaze and gave him nothing to use. After the door closed behind Janice and the children and Mara and their bundled lives, the house went profoundly quiet. Even the officers seemed to understand they were standing inside the remains of something larger than a single evening. Statements were taken, numbers exchanged. Mike handled the practical language with them in the foyer, while I remained in the dining room because I did not trust myself to stand too near my son, with no longer any need to protect his future. He stayed in the kitchen, one hand on the back of a chair, looking not broken, but dislocated. Men like Daniel do not experience collapse as contrition. They experience it as insult. The world has misbehaved. Reality has become illogical. People are refusing their assigned positions. When the officers finally left, it was just the two of us and Mike, who lingered by the front hall pretending to look for his coat, while very intentionally not leaving me alone with him before I wanted to be. Daniel spoke first. "You've destroyed this family." I looked at the table. No one's plate had been touched. The rolls still sat in their basket. The chicken cooled in its platter juices. Lorraine's gravy boat waited in the center of the table, as if dinner still believed in itself more than the people did. "No," I said. "I stopped you from destroying it quietly. You think they'll thank you for this? This isn't for thanks." He stepped into the dining room then, and I saw with a kind of late useless sorrow how much he resembled me around the mouth when he was stripped of composure. "I did everything for this family after Mom died," he said. The old seduction of that sentence nearly got through on reflex alone. After Mom died. The years of casseroles, repairs, folded chairs, school pickups, his hand on my elbow after church when my knee was bad. Service creates debt in American families, and debt is one of the easiest disguises power ever found. "You did many things," I said. "Some of them kind, some of them useful. And then you took the trust those things bought you and spent it on control." He looked at me as though I had started speaking another language. "You're so sentimental about her," he said. "About Mom, about rituals, about what that table was supposed to mean. You never understood that somebody has to hold the line." I think in some dark and private place he expected me to agree with that. Not now, not tonight, but eventually. Fathers have spent centuries telling sons in softer words that order matters more than tenderness, as long as the roof stays on and the bills are paid. Perhaps he thought I would return to that oldest mild church once the neighbors stopped watching. Instead, I said, "Your mother held the line." He opened his mouth, shut it again. "She held it." I went on. "So children ate before they were ashamed. So women sat before the food went cold. So old people didn't have to ask twice for comfort. So men learned the difference between being served and being centered. You copied her sequence and stripped out her mercy. You wore her ritual like a uniform." The words were not loud, but they took something out of him. I saw it. Not the whole man. The version he had always wanted me to authorize. Mike was standing very still in the hall. Daniel looked at the gravy boat. Then he said with a bitterness so naked it almost sounded like youth, "She always liked you best because you made her feel necessary." That was such a small sentence and so terrible. I laughed once softly out of pure heartbreak. "No," I said. "She loved me because she was kind. She needed me less than I deserved, and I understood too little of what she was protecting until tonight." He had no answer to that, none that did not shrink him further. Mike came in then and said, "You need to leave." Daniel looked at him. "This isn't your house." "No," Mike said. "It's Dad's, which is why I'm politely advising you to get your coat before I stop being polite." Daniel looked at me one last time. If there had been even one flicker of remorse in him, I might have suffered more in a way that looked merciful from the outside. But there was no remorse. There was grievance. Injury, the belief that he had been badly used by everyone's weakness. He took his coat from the hall closet, put it on, and left without another word. I watched from the dining room window as he crossed the driveway, shoulders set against the cold, and got into his car. He sat there a long time before backing out. Long enough that I thought maybe he might come back in. He did not. The tail lights finally withdrew down the dark street and were gone. Only then did Mike sit down. We looked at the table. "What a waste of chicken," he said. I laughed, then to my horror found the laugh turning on me. It bent at the middle and came out half broken. I put a hand over my eyes. Mike rose, came around behind me and put his palm once between my shoulder blades. The way men in my family have always done when words would make things worse. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For the part where I was right." That made me laugh properly. And then, because the body cannot always distinguish between those two things, I cried for the first time since the day Lorraine died. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to register the cost of understanding. The weeks after were not neat. I wish they had been. It would make a cleaner story. Justice in houses like ours does not arrive as a single judge's gavel or a villain's confession under bright light. It arrives in forms that feel both too small and too enormous at once. A changed lock, a protective order hearing, a child sleeping through the night in a different room for the first time in months. A doctor writing down symptoms plainly after a woman finally stops minimizing them. A therapist telling a child, gently and repeatedly, that she is not responsible for the weather in a room. A neighbor bringing over soup and not pretending it's only soup. A son no longer invited. A father learning that consequence is sometimes less dramatic than exile and more permanent. Mike did most of the legal navigation because he was better built for paperwork under stress than I was. He found Mara and the children an apartment first, then later something more stable. Janice became in that season the kind of woman every family hopes lives 2 houses down and usually only appreciates after disaster, practical, indiscreet, in exactly the right directions, impossible to shame into silence once she had chosen a side. I gave statements. I met once more with Dr. Ruiz, this time with Mara's written permission. She did not tell me things I did not need to hear, and I respected her all the more for it. She did tell me that children recover best when the adults around them stop asking them to perform certainty. Safety, she said, has to become boring before they trust it. That sentence stayed with me. Daniel called twice in the first 10 days. I did not answer. He texted once. "You're being manipulated by women who need narratives." I showed the message to Mike, who said only useful. Then he saved a screenshot. Mara came by the house one afternoon in late April while the children were at school. She stood in the front hall as if entering a chapel where she had once sinned and been sinned against at the same time. The bruises on her life were not visible in the easy American way people prefer. No purple cheek, no broken arm. Nothing that would let a room of strangers clap itself on the back for having finally recognized evil. She looked instead like a woman recovering from a fever she had carried standing up for too long. "I needed to get the recipe cards I gave Lorraine," she said. "They're in the pantry." She nodded and followed me into the kitchen. The house had changed since that Sunday, even before I made any larger decisions about it. The mudroom door stayed open now, unless weather demanded otherwise. The timer was gone because Mike had thrown mine out in a fit of symbolic overreach, and I had let him. The dining room no longer looked sacred to me in the old way. It looked honest, which is a harsher blessing. Mara stood at the pantry alcove looking at the cards clipped behind Lorraine's. Her fingers hovered over the lemon bars card for a long moment. "She always put mine in with hers," she said. "She liked them." A faint smile crossed her face. "She said I underbaked on purpose because I was too forgiving." "That sounds like Lorraine." Mara looked down at the cards. "I should have told you sooner." The sentence was expected. It still hurt to hear because it tempted me toward forgiveness in the wrong direction. "You should have had to tell no one at all," I said. She closed her eyes briefly. "I thought if I kept things smooth..." She stopped, started again. That's the worst part. At some point, I stopped trying to make them good and started trying to make them smooth enough not to trigger anything. Lorraine's old vocabulary sat between us like another person. He chose the right family for that, I said, before I could stop myself. Mara looked at me carefully, then not offended, measuring whether I was finally willing to indict more than one man in the room. Yes, she said. He did. I nodded because it was true. She took the lemon bars card and one for roast chicken, and then after a hesitation left Lorraine's table order note where it was. Keep that one, she said. I did. By summer, I knew I could not go on living in the old house the way I had before. That realization came slowly, and then all at once, as most true things do. I had thought reclaiming the house meant remaining in it unchanged, proving by my persistence that Daniel had failed to corrupt what Lorraine built. But the more honestly I moved through the rooms, the more I understood that some places are not honored by reenactment. The old house had held too much. Lorraine's brilliance, my blindness, Daniel's theft, Mara's humiliation, Ellie's vigilance, Ben's half-understood weather. Keeping everything in place would not have been devotion, it would have been embalming. So I sold it. Mike thought that was abrupt. Janice cried in the driveway the day the sign went up and accused me affectionately of being dramatic in my old age. Mara said only, I think she'd understand. I hope she was right. The new place was smaller, not tiny, just human-scaled. A one-story brick condo in a quiet development not far from the river with a modest dining area. A kitchen built for function instead of theater and windows that took late light kindly. No mudroom, no side corridor where absence could be staged into routine. No dining room large enough for somebody to disappear in plain sight. I brought with me the good plates, Lorraine's recipe box, the blue loaf dish, the framed photograph from our 25th anniversary, where she was laughing at something outside the frame, and the silver gravy boat. I almost left the boat behind. For a week after the move, it sat wrapped in tarnished cloth in a packing box marked dining room. Though there was no true dining room anymore, only a nook with a window and a table that seated 6 if no one insisted on elbows. I told myself perhaps some objects had completed their service. Perhaps memory did not need silver to prove itself. Then, one afternoon, Ellie came by with Mara, while Mike was helping me assemble a bookshelf that claimed to require one Allen wrench and one temperament more patient than his. Ellie wandered into the kitchen, looked around, and said, "This house feels easier. Children know more than architects." That evening, after they left, I unwrapped the gravy boat. The dent was still there. The silver had gone a little dim in storage. My thumb found the base without needing sight. It did not alarm me anymore. Not because the past had become harmless, because the object had survived reclassification. It no longer meant warning alone. It meant that sequence could be chosen again with knowledge this time instead of innocence. The first Sunday dinner in the new place happened in October. Not because I was ready before then, because by October safety had become boring enough to trust a little. Ellie no longer watched every doorway. Ben had resumed talking through meals at a rate that suggested either healing or sugar, often both. Mara had put a little color back into her face. Mike still arrived late on principle, though never quite as late as he pretended. Janice brought a pie despite explicit instructions not to. The new table fit all of us tightly, and that turned out to be mercy. People close together have a harder time vanishing each other. I cooked chicken, not to replicate the old menu out of piety, because it was October and the weather had turned, and chicken and gravy still made sense in American homes when the light went gold early. The kitchen in the new place held heat differently. The windows did not steam in the corners the way the old ones had. The oven ran a little hot. The floor did not complain under shifting weight. Yet by the time the potatoes were mashed and the beans glossed with butter and shallot, the room had begun to gather that same old domestic weather, pepper, thyme, roasting skin starch. Waiting. I found Lorraine in it, not as an accusation this time, but as a discipline I had finally learned to understand. When everyone arrived, there was no choreography beyond ordinary welcome. Coats on hooks, Ben complaining of hunger, Janice kissing the air near everyone's cheek and declaring the place cozier than the old house because there was less room for nonsense. Mike setting the breadbasket down, wrong on purpose, just to see if I'd correct him. Mara coming in with a dish of lemon bars and not apologizing for it. That last thing undid me a little. "You brought dessert," I said. "I did." "No apology." She smiled, and it was her own smile all the way through. Trying a new thing, promising start. Ellie stood beside her with a purple-colored pencil tucked behind one ear out of long habit, though she had no paper in hand. I asked if she'd help me carry water glasses. She said yes, and did not once look toward any door while we worked. At the table before anyone sat there came one of those tiny, dangerous pauses where old systems used to reassert themselves by reflex. People hovering, half serving, half waiting. I felt it. So did Mara, I think. Mike, too. The air remembered what bodies were trying to forget. Then I heard Lorraine as clearly as if she stood by the stove. "Seat the cook first." I looked at Mara. "You first," I said. She laughed softly. "Tom, really?" "Yes." "Really?" For half a heartbeat, the old resistance flickered in her face, the learned instinct to refuse comfort before it could be used against her. Then she understood the room had no hidden tax in it and sat down. Ellie slid into her seat beside her. Ben clambered into his. Janice fussed with the pie safe. Mike made a complaint about his chair that nobody heard. I remained standing one moment longer. On the counter behind me, the gravy waited in its pot. I carried it to the silver boat, slowly feeling the heat through the handle, smelling the pepper and stock rise up around my face. The late sun from the window turned the surface to brown satin. When I brought the boat to the table, no one reached for it. I stood there with my hand on the handle and looked at the people seated before me. Not a perfect family. Never again that lie. Mike with his impatience and loyalty. Janice with her pie and her shameless witness. Ben swinging one foot. Ellie reaching for her napkin without glancing at a single threshold. Mara seated before the food-visible, tired healing reel. The room was small enough that no one could disappear in it. I thought of Lorraine, then, not as the lost center of a house I had failed to preserve, but as the woman whose meanings I had finally begun too late and not too late to learn. The grief in that remained. It always would. Some things are reclaimed only by admitting what cannot be recovered. I took my seat, and only then did I pour.